Okay, excellent. Welcome to the public hearing for the inquiry into budget estimates 2021 to 2022. Before I commence, I'd like to acknowledge the Gadigal people who are the traditional custodians of this land, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging of the Eora Nation and extend that respect to other Aboriginals present. I welcome Minister Kevin Anderson and accompanying officials to this hearing. Today, the committee will examine the proposed expenditure for the portfolio of better regulation and innovation. Before we commence, I'd like to make some brief comments about the procedures for today's hearing. Today's proceedings are being broadcast live from Parliament's website, and a transcript will be placed on the committee's website once it becomes available. In accordance with the broadcasting guidelines, media representatives are reminded that they must take responsibility for what they publish about the committee's proceedings. All witnesses in budget estimates have a right to procedural fairness, according to the Procedural Fairness Resolution passed by the House in 2018. There may be some questions that a witness can only answer if they have more time or with certain documents to hand, and in those circumstances, witnesses are advised that they can take a question on notice and provide an answer within 21 days. If witnesses wish to hand up documents, they should do so through the committee staff. Minister, I remind you and the officers accompanying you that you are free to pass notes and refer directly to your advisors seated at the table behind you. In terms of the audibility of the hearing today, we do have witnesses in person and also via video conference. So can I ask committee members to clearly identify who their questions are directed to? And could I ask everyone appearing remotely to please state their name when they begin speaking? Could everyone please mute their microphones when they are not speaking? Finally, could everyone please turn their mobile phones to silent for the duration of the hearing? All witnesses will be sworn prior to giving evidence. Minister Anderson, I remind you that you do not need to be sworn, as you have already sworn an oath to your office as a Member of Parliament. I'd also like to remind the following witnesses that you do not need to be sworn, as you have been sworn at an earlier budget estimates hearing before this committee, and that is Ms Emma Hogan, Ms Rose Webb, and I think that's all. Okay. So for all the other witnesses, I ask that you each in turn state your full name, position, title and agency, and then swear either an oath or an affirmation. And the words of the oath and affirmation are on the cards on the table in front of you, or they have been emailed to you. We still don't have our witnesses via video conference, but well, we will be getting there. So in the meantime, I will start with you, Mr. Chandler.
Good, thank you. I swear that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help me God. My name is David Chandler. I'm the New South Wales Building Commissioner. Sorry about that.
That's right. Thank you very much.
Perfect timing.
Reinforcements.
Yeah.
Cavalry's arrived.
It's like Blucher arriving.
Right, so we should have our witnesses appearing by video conference now. I'll just check if they are all there. We should have 6 of them.
Nope.
Looks like we have 5. That's okay. Ms Webb has already been sworn in. Do we have Mr Tansey there?
Nope, there's the 6.
Could I ask Mr Tansey to please state your name, title and agency, and either swear the oath or the affirmation?
Thank you. My name is John Tansey. I'm the Executive Director of Policy and Strategy in the Regulation Division of the Department of Customer Service. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth.
Great. Mr Williams?
Hello, my name's Anthony Williams. I'm the Executive Director of the Compliance and Dispute Resolution branch in the Department of Customer Service. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Mr O'Brien?
Terry O'Brien, Director, Officer Rating, Better Regulation Division, Department of Customer Service. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Ms Griswold? Oh, can you hear us, Ms Griswold?
Yes, I can hear you.
Hello. Could you please state your name, title, agency, and either swear the oath or the affirmation?
Hi, this is Megan McCall again. I'm here, but I have absolutely no
Dexter.
Well, I'd like to say we could hear her, but that's fairly pointless. Isn't it?
Sorry, apologies, Ms. Griswold, if you could try again.
Okay. My name is Valerie Griswold. I'm the Executive Director for Investigations and Enforcement for the Better Regulation Division, the Department of Customer Service. I do sincerely, truly, solemnly declare and affirm that I will tell the truth, help the truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to ask the Secretariat, is Ms. McCool able to hear us now? Shall we wait a moment? Okay, we will come back to Ms. McCool when she's sorted out her technology issues. So please bear with me when we go back to her to swear her in. But in the meantime, if we could start with questions from the opposition.
Thanks very much, Chair. Good afternoon, Minister. Good afternoon, Ms Chandler, Ms Hogan. Thanks for your time. Minister, under the Residential Apartment Buildings Act, the Secretary can issue prohibition orders, including the withholding of the occupation certificate. That's correct, isn't it?
That's correct, Ms Hughes, and good afternoon.
And 9 have been issued, is that correct? Prohibition orders?
I'll just check on those numbers for you, Ms Hughes. I'll just ask Mr Commissioner if he's got those numbers handy.
In prohibition orders, there are 8 prohibition orders issued as at the 20th of October, and 1 more has been issued since.
And what was the date of that last one that was issued?
I don't have that date in front of me, but I'll provide it to you, but I think it was in the last week.
Yep. And what are the grounds for issuing a prohibition order revoking an occupation certificate, Minister?
I'll ask Mr Chandler to do that, but I will make just a comment in relation to that. It's pretty much around the defects of a particular building. If that building is not meeting the building codes of Australia, that an audit would have been undertaken, and the building commissioner would be satisfied that there needs to be work done to rectify those concerns, and subsequently an occupation certificate order would not be issued. But certainly ask Mr Commissioner to elaborate if required.
Ms Hussos, the OC audits follow the path of the Designer Building Practitioners Act, where the key building elements are the focus of the common property. So they look at the structure, the waterproofing, the building enclosure, the fire systems, and the key building services. So when the auditors go onto projects, we've got the skill sets across all of those disciplines, and they go and have a look at those particular elements of the building. Of course, they would have called in a considerable number of documents before they start those audits, so they go in really informed about the building, and they look for the things that they actually have identified. So when we've done an occupation certificate audit, what we do then is that there's a report provided to the developer saying these are the things that were found, and they have an opportunity to come back and either agree or disagree. And in the event we decide that they're going to either issue a building works rectification order or a prohibition order, they're sent draft documents, and again they have the opportunity to challenge those before they're issued. So the process would be then that in the event that we get through all of that, we issue a prohibition order.
And of those, like we said, there's been 9 that have been issued. So we can say that it's fairly serious defects with the essential parts of the functioning of the building. Would you agree with that?
Yes, all of the building elements are coded when we do the audits using a red, green, amber symbology, which I can happy to show you at some time. And anything that's got the reds up, we're not going to go past that without putting a flag up.
I understand. Thanks, Mr Chandler. Minister, according to the Environment Planning and Assessment Act, an occupation certificate is required in order to live in a property. That's correct, isn't it?
That's correct.
Okay. But there's still many people living in these buildings that are subject to these prohibition orders, aren't there?
I'd like you to clarify that, please, in relation to what you actually mean. Could you rephrase your question? I'm not quite understanding that, Ms Hughes.
Well, there's 9 prohibition orders that are in place at the moment, and there are a number of people living in those buildings, aren't there?
If an occupation certificate has not been issued, then people should not be living in that building.
Perhaps you should allow Mr Chandler to answer.
There's 1 prohibition order issued on a building that is occupied. Sorry, I think there are 2. I'm sorry. And that would be prohibiting the issuance of a final occupation certificate on those buildings. So as you're aware, there were buildings that were before the Residential Apartment Buildings Act came in, where in fact it was possible to issue a interim occupation certificate, and we're still cleaning up those as we go. But there are 2 buildings that have got an interim occupation certificate, and we have prohibition orders on the issuance of the final occupation certificate order. So there are 2 buildings, I believe, that are in that category.
Which of those two?
I believe they're the Auburn building, the Murhey building at Auburn, and also the Top Place building at Atmosphere at Castle Hill.
Atmosphere and what we could call the Aya Eliza building.
Is that the one in Auburn
93 Auburn Road, Auburn.
Yeah, that's the original one.
Yeah.
And do you have a total on the number of people that are living in those properties?
Again, off the top of my head, I think that both of them have got about 200 apartments in each, so potentially 400 apartments.
Okay.
Maybe a bit more.
Should new residents be moving into these properties, Minister?
Look, I'll
They're
take the advice.
subject to a prohibition order.
Yeah, I'll take the advice of the Building Commissioner on that, Ms Hughes, in relation to the status of that prohibition and the reason for the prohibition being put on the building.
Well, Minister, before we come to Mr Chandler, and I will have some more questions for him in a moment, I'm interested in your perspective. These are pretty notorious apartments that are subject of prohibition orders that are not being issued occupation certificates. That is, they've got some pretty serious problems with building defects in them. Do you think new residents should be allowed to move into these buildings?
The residents, as we've just heard from the Commissioner, that interim occupation certificate has been issued and there's some work to be done. If that situation was to change, then we would be advised by the Commissioner to take action.
Sorry, there's some work to be done. I mean, it's not just some work to be done, Minister. These are pretty serious defects with the buildings that have caused the most serious exercise of his powers under the Residential Apartment Buildings Act. Do you think it's appropriate for new residents to be moving into these buildings?
Well, I'll take the advice of the Building Commissioner on that, but the interim occupation certificate has been issued pending a final.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the process, Minister. I'm asking for whether you think it is appropriate for new residents to move into deeply defective buildings that are here in Sydney.
I'll take the advice of the Building Commissioner in relation to the status of that building and the work that's being done to rectify those defects.
Well, you're the Minister that's responsible. Don't you have a view? Would you move into these buildings, Minister?
I'll take the advice of the Building Commissioner. That's his job, Ms Hughes, and I will endeavour, as always, to take his advice. That's why he's the expert in the field, and my job is to make sure that we do look after consumers. They are looked after. There is an interim occupation certificate, and should that situation change, then the Building Commissioner will advise me.
How can you say you look after consumers when these interim occupation certificates aren't worth the piece of paper that they're written on?
Well,
like one of these buildings has been characterised by Mr Chandler as the worst building he's ever seen. And do you think, I am asking you, Minister, for your opinion about whether you think new residents should be moving into these buildings?
I'll take the advice of the Building Commissioner on that, Ms Hughes, because he's the one who is monitoring the remediation of those defects. So if he believes that further action needs to be taken, then it will be taken.
Well, at Auburn...
Point of order. I think Mr Chandler wanted to add to that.
I just wanted to clarify to say that both of those buildings are habitable, and that I have cleared those buildings with Fire and Rescue New South Wales to make sure that they have no objection to the safety of the people in those buildings. So as you had another building just recently where there was a question about the structural stability, I take advice from other agency leads on that, but I can tell you that at 93 Auburn Road, I have a communication in writing from Fire and Rescue to say they don't take exception to the continued occupation of the building. Now, it's not desirable for people to be buying into buildings that have got those defects, so they're to be navigated still. And the real estate agents who are involved in those buildings have been firmly placed on notice by Fair Trading that they should be making it clear to prospective purchasers that the building has the defects identified in the orders.
Well, we'll come to that in just a moment, but let me just go back to that. You say it's not desirable to be buying into these buildings, and I agree with you, Mr. Chandler. These are buildings that require huge amounts of work. So Minister, what are you doing to make sure that buyers are aware of the serious defects in these buildings?
Well, they are aware, Ms. Husos, and this is the reason why we've brought in the Design and Building Practitioners Act, the Residential Apartment Buildings Act, given the Commissioner the powers to do what he needs to do to be able to ensure that people are living in safe buildings, and if there is a concern, then the Building Commissioner will act.
Mr. Chandler, you talked about the Atmosphere building and the Eliza building. The Atmosphere building has 3 towers. Are there currently prohibition orders on all 3?
Yes.
Okay. And at the Eliza building, there's 2. There's a 93 Auburn Road, and then there's one on Harrow Road as well.
Well, it changed its address for convenience, but we did sort that out with the real estate agent.
Excellent. Yes. Well, a bit of Google mapping shows that.
They're
yes.
joined at the hip, you would describe it.
That's right. That's exactly right. So, Mr. Chandler, but both of these buildings have only interim occupation certificates.
Yes, that was, I guess, a part of history where buildings were able to get these interim occupation certificates, and there are very many of them out there, and some of them are going to be a little bit challenging to close out because some of those certifiers, for example, like Vic Lilly, are no longer able to issue a final certificate. So people are actually having to go back to the council to actually get them to issue the final certificate, because at the end of the day, with no certifier, councils become that certifier.
Mr. Chandler, how many interim occupation certificates are there in force in New South Wales?
I don't have that number. I'll look it up, but I don't have that number. But I would say there would be many, Ms. Husos, really many.
If you could take that on
When you
notice.
say many, just give us so accepting you'll take it on notice, just some sort of ballpark.
If I had to pick a number, I would say it would be in the order of 100, but it might be more, might be less. But okay.
Okay.
Mr. Chandler, it's not really in your remit, though. It's in the broader fair trading remit for this information to be communicated with buyers. Is that correct?
Where we've issued orders, we issue a notice to the developer to make sure that they have advised the real estate agent that in fact they should be making the presence of the orders known. And in some instances where we've seen the agents continue to represent the product, we call the agents directly and put them on notice that they should be making prospective purchasers aware of those notices.
And how many of those? Sorry, that's what you do, Mr. Chandler, yourself?
No, I don't. Fair Trading do that.
Okay. Who in fair trading does that?
That would be done out of the Director of Building and Property Services in Fair Trading.
Okay. And who in the faces on WebEx should I be directing those questions to?
Ms. Webb would probably be the best person to answer that because the line management flows to her.
The Director of Building and...
Property.
Okay, thank you very much. Minister, I'm going to give you 2 documents. I've got copies here for the Chair, enough for the Chair. I think you've got some there.
I didn't get one?
The Chair and also for the Minister. So there's currently 2 properties that are for sale on in the Atmosphere building, and I'm providing you with examples of their advertisements there.
Thank you very much.
Which don't disclose that they are subject of prohibition orders.
Real estate agents don't have to do that.
Yeah, they do. They do.
There's nothing on there that shows any mention of prohibition orders. And I can let you know that I spoke to the real estate agent this morning and he made no disclosure of the prohibition orders. What efforts, Minister, are you doing to make sure that first home buyers or that home buyers in general are being informed of these prohibition orders?
Ms. Husos, under the Property Stock and Agents Act, vendors and agents have an obligation to disclose material facts relating to the property. including if it's on the asbestos register, containing combustible cladding, or has a prohibition or building works rectification order in force. So I'd be happy to take this particular situation on notice and have it investigated.
Well, Minister,
Just one sec, just let it finish.
Minister, this is only the latest examples. This was raised with you 4 months ago. A series of apartments were raised with you 4 months ago of properties that were for sale that were not disclosing this important information. What steps did you take then to ensure that home buyers were informed?
I'll take that on notice, but in relation to the issue that you've just brought forward, certainly there is an obligation under the Property Stock and Agents Act for vendors and agents to disclose material facts, so I'll have that looked at.
Well, it's all very well for you to point them to their requirements, Minister, but I'm interested to know what action are you taking? Because it's all very well to issue a prohibition order, but if it's not being communicated to apartment owners and it's not being communicated in the advertisements or by the real estate agents, what action are you taking as the Minister?
Point of order, Chair. Point of order.
I'll hear the point of order.
I respect the Honourable Courtney Husos and her line of questioning. However, this question that she's posed is been asked now twice and taken on notice twice by the Minister. So, again, she can continue to ask it, but it's already been taken on notice twice.
Thank you. It is completely up to the member as to whether they want to ask that question more than once. It's not badgering at this point. So, thank you, but continue, Ms Husos.
Madam Chair, I'm happy to, Ms Husos, through Secretary to Fair Trading Commissioner, to look at what action has been taken.
Ms Webb.
So I don't have any information on that particular matter to hand. We'll try and see what we can find before the end of the hearing, or otherwise take it on notice, as the Minister mentioned.
Well, let me draw your attention to another building, another sale that has been listed. Again, as Mr Chandler has said, they've helpfully changed from the 93 Auburn to address to 18 Harrow Road, but it is the same flawed building in Auburn. It is the same building that Mr Chandler characterised as the worst building in all of New South Wales, that he's ever seen.
At that date.
Not say at that date.
I might press you on that further, Mr Chandler, but sorry, Merrin, can I ask you to pass these ones up?
Just while we're doing that, if I could just take the opportunity to swear Ms McCool in. I understand Ms McCool can hear us now. Can you hear us, Ms McCool?
Yeah, my apologies.
Actually, Merrin.
No problem at all. If I could just ask you to state your name, position, title and agency, and then to either swear the oath or the affirmation, please.
Sure. Megan McCool, Director.
It should be attached to this
New
contract.
South Wales. I solemnly say and declare that the evidence now has to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Continue, Ms Husos.
Thanks very much, thank you very much, Chair. So, Minister, what's happening? I'm passing you on 3 further examples. So there is an example of. So we now have 2 buildings in the atmosphere. We have another building in the Ira Eliza building. We have a second building in the Ira Eliza building that's up for lease. And we have another building in the Asquith building, which has been also well publicised, that's being specifically marketed for first home buyers. Now, none of these advertisements actually disclose that there are serious defects on the properties. And in fact, and as I said to you, I spoke to the real estate agents this morning and it was not disclosed. What are you doing about it, Minister?
Well, they will be investigated, Ms Husos, because clearly under the Property Stock and Agents Act, they should be disclosing on the bill of sale if there is a prohibition order on that. But I will go back through the Secretary and through the Fair Trading Commissioner, Madam Secretary, in relation to that.
Ms Webb.
Ms Webb, how many investigations have been launched?
Into breaches of that provision of the Property and Stock and Agents Act, I would have to take that on notice. Yep.
So who, Minister, this isn't the first time that it's been brought to your attention. This was the front page of the Sydney Morning Herald 4 months ago. What has changed since then?
So as part of the Property Stock and Agents Act, Ms Hughes, they are required to do that. We'll take that on notice in terms of those properties you've just brought to our attention, and certainly we'll go back through and make sure that if they have done the wrong thing, then they will be in breach and they will face penalties. So we'll take action against those if they have breached the Property Stock and Agents Act.
Yeah, but this isn't about individual agents, Minister. This is about clearly there are prohibition orders that are out there. There are prohibition orders that you are saying are supposed to be cleaning up the industry, and they're not being communicated with home buyers. What are you doing as the Minister to actually make sure that home buyers know about these prohibition orders, know about these serious defects?
Well, we're doing everything we can in terms of informing agents of their obligations.
Okay, what's everything we can?
Well, there's education programs, there's campaigns. It's being talked about through the Building Commission. It's online. It's lots of social media outlets. But we will certainly, these areas that you've highlighted here, Ms Hughes, we will take on notice, and we will look if they have breached the Property Stock and Agents Act under the vendors and agents sections. Then we'll take them take them on notice.
Minister, you're saying that there's a couple of social media posts and there's an education program from Mr Chandler. What are you doing as the Minister to make sure that first home buyers are aware of it? How many investigators have you got on the case? How many investigations have you launched? What are you doing to make sure there are two buildings that have people living in them, and a quick search of realestate.com unveiled these? How is it that fair trading waits to come to budget estimates to be alerted to these?
Well, that's why, Ms Hughes, we've got to stay ahead of the game. We've got to keep pushing.
You cannot seriously be saying you are staying ahead of the game.
I'll hear the point of order.
The Minister was attempting to provide a detailed answer to the question of the Honourable Courtney Hughes, and she has continued to interject on the Minister, and I'd ask you to call it to order and allow the Minister to continue his very detailed responses.
Thank you. Mrs Hughes, your time has run out anyway. We do seem to be having some technical difficulties with the witnesses on WebEx.
See each other, but they can't see us.
Okay, understand. So we are going to fix that up. Could I just ask, I was going to begin by asking questions, but I think maybe some of the witnesses online were required for that line of questioning. Mr Shoebridge, are you wanting to ask questions of people in the room?
Yes.
Then please go ahead.
All right. Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your attendance, Minister, Commissioner.
Mr Shoebridge.
Nice to see you again.
Thank you, and you too.
Following on from the questions that Ms Hughes was putting, what are the arrangements in place to actually notify real estate agents? Okay. Because it's been a repeated problem. There's the three incidents that Ms Hughes has raised with you, but it's not limited to them. It's a repeated problem. What are the arrangements in place to notify real estate agents of their obligations?
Well, certainly they should, through checking of contracts. Their solicitors should be doing that when they look through the contracts in terms of are there any prohibition orders on those bills of sale, and the awareness campaign that we've put out through the real estate reforms under the Property Stock and Agents Act, they should know. But if people are doing the wrong thing, Mr Shoebridge, they will be held to account.
Well, Minister, look, I mean, yes, of course the real estate agents should be disclosing that in the advertising, but they're not. But the question is, how are the real estate agents finding out about the prohibition orders? What are the arrangements in place in your department to make sure the information is going out to the real estate agents? Because if they don't know, they can't advise.
Owners' corporations would be told, so they would then have that information at hand, and this is where real estate agents need to be doing the right thing.
So owners' corporations need to tell real estate agents?
Well, there needs to be that network. And I'll just confirm...
Minister, stop it. Owners' corporations aren't in a discussion between the property owner and the real estate agent. They're not in that discussion. So we can rule out owners' corporations as being a way of doing it. So you're saying the owners' corporation should, as soon as it matters for sale, proactively contact all the real estate agents. That's your solution, is it, Minister? Well, Mr Chandler might shed some light on it.
Well, when a solicitor acts for a purchaser, they call in a range of documents. So, for example, they would look at the minutes of the meetings and the records of meetings of the owners' corporation. So those documents should be available, first of all, in that set. They should also be able to look at the Office of Fair Trading website and identify those buildings that have orders on them.
But you see, Commissioner, you're at a very different point. The point is that the real estate agents, when they're advertising properties for sale, have an obligation to notify that there's a prohibition order in place. They're not doing that. Now, the real estate agent is not going to be contacting someone's solicitor before they put an ad out, a prospective purchaser's solicitor before they put an ad out. They're not going to be contacting the owners' corporation before they put the ad out. The real estate agent needs to know from the Department of Fair Trading or from the Building Commissioner or from some other part in the department that a prohibition order has been put in place.
Well, it's on the Fair Trading website, so their searches should reveal that, and then the solicitor's purchaser should then do those searches, and it would be uncovered as part of due process. So if there are those real estate agents that aren't doing the right thing, they do need to be held to account, Mr. Shubridge, and we'll do that.
So every real estate agent should be trawling through the Department of Fair Trading's website to identify all prohibition notices, which I've got to tell you was a hell of a challenge, and cross-referencing that against each property before they put the ad up. That's your position, is it, Minister? That's the arrangements you have in place?
It's part of that process where I think real estate agents have to have due diligence in that process if they are doing their job, and then obviously the purchaser's solicitor as well. So there needs to be a confluence of investigations and processes that will ultimately, if you are purchasing a property, you would want to know what the situation is in relation to that property. So
See, the problem I have with your answers, Minister, is that first of all it was the owners' corporations that should be doing it. Then it was the purchaser's solicitor that should be doing it. Then it's the real estate agents that should be, going out and trawling the Fair Trading website. What is your department doing? And maybe Ms. Webb can tell us, to proactively send a notification out to the industry, the real estate industry, in a comprehensive way, so that real estate agents know when prohibition orders have been made.
And I'll ask Secretary.
Yeah, so my understanding, and I'll get Ms Webb to elaborate, is that agents, that Fair Trading team do reach out to agents in the area who, if they know that there is a prohibition order in place, and especially if they see them selling something that's got a PHO on it. So Ms Webb might be able to elaborate now she's back online.
No, I concur with that. As the Minister said, we're also doing a lot of education activity directly, so that real estate agents understand their obligations, and when vendors are preparing properties for sale, that they should be putting information about that available, but also proactive campaigns in local areas, and we will certainly investigate any complaints to help.
Well, that sounds to me, Minister, that it's ad hoc, inadequate, and the evidence would suggest it's not working. Do you have an answer to that?
Well, Mr. Shubridge, I do have an answer to that. That's why we're putting on a Property Services Commissioner to look at the areas that do need to be worked on, those areas that do need to be fixed. The Property Services Commissioner is a very important role that will have a role to play in looking at some of those gaps, working between the industry and the regulator to try to make sure that those lines of communications are clear. So the Property Services Commissioner's role will also to be look at how do we fix those problems that you're highlighting there. And I think, agents should be doing the right thing, within themselves in terms of making sure that they look after
I look forward to the Property Services Commissioner legislation coming in a fortnight's time when Parliament returns. So I think implicit in that is an acknowledgement that there's not enough in place now, and you're going to do something else.
We are, Mr. Chandler. Mr. Shubridge, thank you.
Minister, I've given you a document, but I might ask you to share it with Mr. Chandler. This is the Project Remediate Industry Briefing on the Cladding Product Safety Panel of the 1st of September 2021. You would be familiar with this?
Mr. Chandler?
Yeah, this is the presentation that we presented to, the same presentation we essentially presented to your committee on the 6th of July.
Yes, and then, but I don't know if this has changed slightly.
No, it hasn't,
It looks very familiar.
So what you
to
heard
that.
on the 6th of July, it's here.
Yeah, and can I say, Commissioner, look, the criticisms I have of what's happening or not happening isn't criticism of what you've done. There's a hell of a lot to do, and I acknowledge that there's a hell of a lot to do. But what this document basically shows that the requirements in place for cladding to satisfy the requirements of Project Remediate. Would that be a fair summary of what
Yes,
this
it does,
document does? And what it makes clear is that Project Remediate requirements go well beyond the building code requirements for safe cladding.
They go beyond the Building Code of Australia
Yep.
to adopt what we would call best practice. I think you acknowledged that at the time.
Yeah, and I do, and I
thank
continue
you,
to
yeah.
acknowledge it. With
No, I
maybe some
know
issues on
I
the
know
edges,
there's no
but yes.
question, so that's good. yeah.
So if I could take you to the first, second, third, fourth, the fourth page, which has got design, fire safety, part 1. Do you see that?
Mm-hmm.
This talks about the AS 5113 test that has been done for cladding, which is where you basically have a wall of cladding. You put a big fat furnace at the bottom of it, you set fire to the furnace at the bottom, and you test how the cladding and the system that's been used to apply it, how it responds to the fire.
Mm-hmm.
That'd be a fair summary of the AS 5113 test.
Well, that's why we brought Mr. Harriman along to explain it technically to you,
Yes.
because, as you know, I'm not an engineer and I'm not a fire engineer.
But your work person-like understanding accords with mine. That's basically what happens. You put a big furnace on the bottom, you set fire to it, and you see what happens.
Well, that's not entirely the methodology we would take for testing cladding, Mr. Shoebridge, and
Well, anyhow, it's the Australian standard 5113, which
Sure.
is the large wall test. Yep. And you can see there it in practice, large furnace burning, and you can see the fire spreading up.
it's
Can you see that?
impressive, yeah.
If you go to the next page, one of the requirements for Project Remediate is that there be cavity barriers put in place to prevent the fire spreading vertically,
And
basically.
horizontal.
That's necessary because quite often cladding, when it's put on a building, there's a gap between the cladding and the interior wall of the building or the exterior wall of the building, and it creates a kind of chimney effect which draws the fire up. To prevent that, the cavity barriers are put in place to prevent the chimney operating.
And in particular, where the source of the fire is actually in the apartment itself, not the cladding.
Correct. Could be coming out through a window or
Well, it could be a fridge on fire that's lit up the lounge suite.
Yeah, or a barbecue. But importantly, as that sheet shows, those cavity barriers are not required by the deemed to satisfy provisions in the Building Code of Australia.
Correct.
Yep. So if we go to the next panel, you can see there a facade fire test using the 5113 standard with fibre cement panelling. And this, of course, there's no cavity barriers, but it would still be compliant with the Building Code of Australia.
Yep.
And what you can see there is that, in fact, the chimney effect operating in full force. You can see the fire having been at the bottom and then escaping out the top, blowing out the top. Can you see that?
Get to it. You've got one.
Keep going.
You just ask the question at the end of this.
Give them the ALP stuff.
Well, I might just take you to the next slide, which is a test of solid aluminium. Now, one of the tests is solid aluminium with the cavity barriers. That's the one on the left. And one of the tests is solid aluminium without the cavity barriers. That's the one on the right. Do you see that?
You have a whiteboard.
It has to be verbal, sorry. You do see that?
For the hand side, you have to say
Hand side.
yes.
Sorry, yes, I can see that. Thank you.
Yeah. Now, the one on the left is what would happen under Project Remediate, and there's about 200 buildings going through the Project Remediate process. That's correct?
There will be fire barriers on Project Remediate, so you won't have that picture you see on the 11th. on the left, rather.
So if you're on a building that's lucky enough to be in Project Remediate, the fire's going to have minimal spread because of the carriers.
You understand
That's
the diagram, thank you.
Yes. But if you're in the thousands of other buildings, including ones that are currently being constructed at the moment around New South Wales with aluminium cladding on it, your situation is described by the image on the right, isn't it?
I'm not going to go with those images. These are often images provided by manufacturers trying to disrepute their competitors' products.
Commissioner, this is an image provided by Alan Harriman, the cladding product safety panel member, provided to Public Accountability Committee and provided to the industry by your office and the Minister's office. That's what that image is, isn't it?
Well, I'm going to talk to Project Remediate. If it's outside that, then I can't help you.
Well, Commissioner, you know that the image on the right, which is an entire wall of cladding that has been burnt to a cinder with fire spreading across the entire wall, represents what can happen on pretty much any building that's got aluminium cladding on it
That's not
without
in
the cavity
Project Remediate.
barriers.
That's not in Project Remediate.
That's not in Project Remediate.
Correct.
Minister, there are thousands of buildings across the state with exactly this kind of cladding on it. No cavity barriers being built at the moment. How are you allowing that to happen? You can see what happens here. The entire wall goes up in flames. Why aren't you doing something about it?
So we are attacking through, firstly, the Class 2 high-rise residential under Project Remediate, Mr Shoebridge, and those buildings that are in as part of Project Remediate will be remediated. Yes, Chair.
Minister, there are thousands and thousands of buildings with this kind of aluminium cladding on it. You've got all the evidence that shows it's a major fire hazard, and you're doing nothing.
There are many buildings that have already been remediated, Mr Shoebridge, and those in Project Remediate, as you saw yesterday, that work started on the triaging of those high-rise. They are the ones, the high risk, the ones that we need to focus on immediately, and that's the work that's being done now.
You're being called to order, Dave.
Yeah, sorry. I thought you were maybe going to be a little shorter than that. We'll may have time to come back.
Is he ever?
I uphold that point forward. So
You may not think it's a big issue. I do, actually.
it is.
I did not say that.
No.
Please stop putting words in people's mouths.
Order. Right. Minister, if I could just ask you some questions about Greyhound Racing New South Wales and specifically the Greyhounds as Pets program. I understand that under their operating licence, Greyhounds Racing New South Wales is required to progressively improve the total number of dogs that they are rehoming each year, and that they need to report on that rehoming target in their annual report. In the annual report, they talk about gap-assisted rehoming, but not greyhounds directly rehomed. How is gap-assisted rehoming defined?
Before I ask the racing director to elaborate on that, the gap-assisted chair is where they'll take a greyhound and triage it, if you will, in terms of its suitability for being rehomed. Whether that dog needs to spend some time at a rehoming facility under the control of Greyhound Racing New South Wales to ensure that it, the racing behavioural traits are negated and it becomes more user-friendly for, say, as a pet, or there may be some other incidences where the dog may not be suitable immediately as a greyhound, as a pet straight up. So there are different avenues to try to look at rehoming. But I'd like to ask the Director of Racing New South Wales, Madam Chair, through you, Mr O'Brien.
Thank you. And just before you do, Mr O'Brien, if you could specifically tell me how gap-assisted is defined and how that differs from number of dogs actually rehomed through GAP.
So my understanding is that in addition to the GAP program that GRSW runs, it also provides assistance to other independent rehoming organisations, so financial assistance, and talk about the triage assistance and assessment as well.
So, sorry, could you then define what they mean when they say gap assisted?
So it's the rehoming organisations, or greyhounds rehome through the organisations that GRSW supports.
Right, so they take, okay, so let me understand this. They are taking credit not only for the dogs that are rehomed through GAP directly, but also for any that are rehomed through organisations that they've given some money to. Is that what you're saying?
So they both rehome dogs directly through GAP, and then they also provide a financial assistance to other rehoming organisations to help them rehome dogs.
So when their strategic plan states that they aim to rehome 1,000 greyhounds per year within the next 3 years through GAP, but then the GWIC annual report only shows 246 dogs being rehomed through GAP, are you saying that the GAP-assisted number is higher than 246 dogs?
Yes, that's right. That's my understanding.
So how much is the GAP-assisted rehoming?
So for 2019-20, and this is from GRSW, they rehomed 497 dogs. Through gap or through gaps?
497. That's some way below the 1,000 that they're aiming to rehome, isn't that right, Minister?
It is below that target, Chair, but I think you have to have a target, otherwise you don't have a goal to aim for. So I think that the work being done by Greyhound Racing New South Wales is quite significant with rehoming the various, and as you rightly point out, Chair, the various options that greyhounds are able to enjoy their retirement.
How many dogs did GAP euthanise in the last financial year?
I'll ask Racing New South Wales, Mr O'Brien, to have those numbers, please.
Yeah, I don't have that figure in hand, but I do have those numbers.
You don't know how many, so we know how many dogs they rehomed, which was way below what they should have, but you don't know how many dogs they killed?
Not specifically through GAP.
Is that...
The Commission reports quarterly on retirement and end-of-life outcomes for greyhounds in New South Wales. So I'm happy to provide those figures, but I don't have specific ones for GAP.
The licence also requires Greyhound Racing New South Wales to make available to GWIC on request the verified outcomes of a reasonable representative sample of rehomed greyhounds. Has that ever been undertaken, do we know?
Mr O'Brien?
I need to take that on notice and ask the Commission the details of what has been provided by GRSW.
Thank you. In relation to the numbers of dogs that have been euthanised by GAP, if you could let us know, not just in the last financial year, but also previous 3 years, that would be very useful.
I have, are you, just, sorry, Chair, are you saying euthanised by GAP or just euthanised generally?
Oh, well, both of those figures would be useful, but I am particularly interested in the numbers that are being euthanised by GAP. Minister, are you aware of the recent disciplinary findings against 3 different greyhound industry participants for pin firing?
I don't have that information in front of me, Chair, but if you would like to elaborate on those 3 individuals, then certainly we can take those on notice for you. So pin firing, for anyone who doesn't know, is illegal under POTCA. It involves sticking a red-hot needle into a tendon or ligament to cause tissue damage and then scar tissue to supposedly tighten the joint for racing, to make presumably to make the dog race quicker. There were 3 warnings as reported in the Greyhound Recorder. Perhaps I could give them to you separately rather than naming those individuals here, but I could name them if you would like me to. But the practice has been prohibited for 24 years. Clearly, the horrendous cruelty that had this industry banned in 2016 is still present in some parts of this industry, isn't it? Well, if those incidents, and I haven't seen those and don't have the details, Chair, but that's appalling. If that's the case, I certainly have zero tolerance to animal cruelty, regardless of the animal, and when it comes to greyhounds. We've done a significant amount of work in terms of welfare and integrity of the greyhound racing industry. Participants do the right thing. They're embracing the new reforms, they're embracing the new rules and regulations, and they're embracing the way that the industry should go forward. There is no room in the industry for the people as you are mentioning.
In October last year, you stated that the then new Code of Practice had the highest welfare standards in the country, and you said that New South Wales can, quote, take the lead. Do you consider a 44% increase in deaths on tracks taking the lead?
Ms. Chair, I don't believe those numbers are correct. I'm happy to take them on notice, but the numbers that I have significantly point toward a downward trend when it comes to those numbers over the last couple of years, and that is on the back of the track safety standards, that is on the back of the welfare and integrity that the Greyhound Racing New South Wales and the whole industry and participants are embracing. These people love their dogs, they love their greyhounds, Chair, and they would not want to see them injured. So anybody who does go down that path, they should be banned. They should face the full force of the law and should not be allowed to participate in the industry.
Are you aware that from January to March, so the first quarter of this year, GWIC reported that the catastrophic injury rate this quarter is the highest reported since the beginning of 2019. And catastrophic injury is that results in sudden death or requires euthanasia. Highest into what are we doing wrong that this is still occurring on our tracks?
Well, in terms of 2019, 2020, and when you look at other jurisdictions, Greyhound Racing New South Wales reported 69 racing fatalities compared to 52 injuries in New South Wales, and that is trending downward. And that is as a result of the welfare and integrity and the track safety standards that are being put in place now, given the work that's being done right across New South Wales. And we're seeing some of that work now with the straight track at Richmond, which is a much safer option. We're seeing tracks being upgraded where the corners are being fixed to adjust the camber. You need to understand, Chair, as you do, that these animals are the Formula Ones of the...
we may disagree on that. Could I just, sorry, because time is limited, can I just point out to you that the 2021 number of deaths so far, up until the 26th of October, New South Wales had the highest number of deaths. New South Wales has 54 greyhounds dying this year already. The next highest is Victoria with 37. How do you marry that up with the idea that we have the highest welfare standards in Australia?
Oh, I don't have the veracity of those numbers, Chair, but I'm happy to take your numbers and put them against mine, and we'll try to see if we can find the right answer. But I firmly believe, just lastly, that in terms of the track safety standards that Greyhound Racing New South Wales are implementing right across, whether it be through Grafton all the way to Broken Hill and all places in between, that there is significant work being done, like the whole-of-life electronic tracking that we announced not so long ago.
We may talk about because it doesn't actually do the trick, but we will come back to that. Over to the opposition.
Right, thank you, Chair. Minister, I might return to where we were when my colleague was putting to you those 5 properties, all examples of places where buyers, including first home buyers, might not be aware, might not have been made aware of the condition of those properties. I just want to be clear, firstly, what you've agreed you will do. You variously indicated you would have it investigated, or you'd have it looked at, or you'd take it on notice. Just to be clear, we don't want you coming back in 21 days just saying, look, I'm providing an answer on notice. Who will investigate this? What will they do, given the evidence that's been put in front of you by my colleague?
Thanks, Mr Graham. If people are in breach of the Property Stock Agents Act in relation to notification, then they will be investigated. And I'll ask the Fair Trading Commissioner through you, Madam Secretary, in relation to what can be done. But I agree with you, Mr Graham. If they are doing the wrong thing, then agents do need to be held.
So what I want to know is, what have you committed to today? You've said you will have it investigated. Not if they're doing the wrong thing, we'll investigate. You will have the evidence that's been put in front of you investigated. Is that what you've committed to today?
I will, Mr Graham, I'll check the veracity of what you are saying, and I don't doubt that, but I'll just do my own homework, thank you. And then if they are doing the wrong thing, they will certainly be investigated by Fair Trading. Right,
so you're not committing to investigating will Fair Trading look at the evidence that's been put in front of you today and investigate it, and who will do that?
We will certainly look at the evidence that you've put in front of us today, Mr Graham, and if there is a breach of the Property Stock and Agents Act, then action will be taken.
Yeah, but you're not committing to a formal investigation today.
Point of order.
No, look,
I'll hear the point of order.
The Minister's actually answering this.
Okay, order. I'll hear the point of order.
Yet again, it's...
Is it the same point of order?
No, it's becoming a bit of a trend that the opposition ask a question, the Minister takes it on notice or provides an answer, and then the opposition then go to say, you're not answering the question, and ask the same question again. Now, it's occurred 3 times now, and I'd ask you to actually draw members to the fact that there is a procedural fairness resolution and this continual badgering and then putting words in the minister's mouth is not acceptable.
Thank you. Sorry. No, I don't need any more contributions on the point of order. I don't believe we've got to the badgering stage, and by all means, Minister, tell me if you're feeling badgered.
I'm not feeling badgered, thank
Minister
you,
was
Chair, but
doing-
thank you, Mr Fang.
So if you could continue.
Right. I just want to be clear what you are committing to, Minister. So you'll pass this on, but you're not commencing a formal investigation, is what you're saying here.
I'll take on board the information that you've provided to me, Mr Graham, and if there is a breach of the Property and Stock Agents Act, they will be investigated.
That's what you will do. Now I want to ask, what have you done? I mean, these are not, here's some new examples, but this has been referred to in the media very publicly about other cases 4 months ago, some of these. What did you do? Were those investigated? What action did you take at that point? Separate to what you will do, what have you actually done when these have been public?
I'll ask the Fair Trading Commissioner to respond to that if I can. Thanks, Mr Graham.
So I'm asking the team for some information just to see if we're already looking at these matters, and if I can get that before the session finishes, I'll certainly let you know. I don't have any information to hand about specific investigations, but as the Minister previously mentioned, we have been alerting real estate agents to the fact that they would be in breach of the Act if they continue to inform.
Ms Webb, I think we're happy to, if you can come back in the session with some information, that'd be good. But to your knowledge, Minister, I mean, these were in the paper very publicly. To your knowledge, there's been no investigation commenced that you've requested. You made no request when these were.
I'll get that information to you, Mr Graham. But again, this is why the Property Services Commissioner's role will be so important to make sure that
you
this stuff.
requested it, though, wouldn't you?
We will make sure that if there is an investigation underway, we'll come back to you on that. But the Property Services Commissioner's role is part of that process to make sure that real estate agents continue to do the right thing.
Ms Webb, how are you notifying real estate agents?
So I think the Minister previously mentioned several ways. So both directly to real estate agents who are in the local vicinity. We're also educating. We have regular electronic direct mails. We have our Property Services Advisory Committee. We have regular webinars to real estate agents. And so we're using a complete variety of means to inform them and educate them.
Well, Minister, let me put this direct quote to you from the Real Estate Institute of New South Wales CEO, Tim McKibben, who says Fair Trading have provided no education that he is aware of in relation to this issue in terms of prohibition orders. They might have put something on, they've put something on their website and they have a document they update on an ad hoc basis, but there is very little, and this is a direct quote, very little knowledge of this issue in the market.
Well, as you heard from the Fair Trading Commissioner, Ms Hughes, we are out there. There will be some that perhaps miss some of that marketing and that educational opportunity.
Minister, you are actually misleading the committee now when you say that there are some who have missed. This is the peak body for real estate agents saying that there is very little knowledge about this issue in the market. This was first raised 4 months ago with you, and you cannot point except to a couple of emails that may or may not have been sent out.
Ms Hughes, as we said, we will take that on board, and the Fair Trading Commission is looking at what investigations in relation to those issues you've brought forward, and in relation to the Real Estate Institute of New South Wales. We have regular communication with them. They are yet to raise that with me in relation to what you're talking about, but we'll continue to work with the Real Estate Institute as well as the many other organisations right across New South Wales. And again, this is why a Property Services Commissioner is about to be appointed. We're very close to announcing who that person will be, to look at what we need to do to fill the gap, Ms Hughes, that you are talking about right now. And just like we did with the Building Commissioner, that's what the Property Services Commissioner will do, to look at, are there gaps in terms of that education? Are there gaps in terms of that campaign process to inform real estate agents? So that's the work we're doing right now.
Well, the peak body, you don't need to engage someone else. The peak body for real estate agents is telling you there's a problem. It was raised 4 months ago on the front page of a major metropolitan newspaper, and it appears that your government's response to protect apartment owners from buying into deeply defective buildings is to say, we'll send a couple of emails to real estate agents. Minister, what protection Do you know how many apartments have been sold in these buildings over the last 4 months?
I don't have those numbers, Ms Hughes, but we can take it on notice and come back to you.
Are you tracking those numbers?
I don't have that information, Ms Hughes, but I will have that. I'll take it on notice and come back to you. I'll come back to you on that.
But isn't that the sort of information you should have at your fingertips, Minister?
I can ask the Fair Trading Commission if she has those numbers at her fingertips.
The numbers of apartments sold, I don't have. I've now got some information about letters having been written to real estate agents in relation to Mcdougall orders, and it was done by requesting details of all agents that were selling property in the development from the developer, and then we wrote letters to all of those and advising them of the requirements. And we continue to write that information out specifically to those agents. But we can find some details of how many, in fact, properties have been sold since the orders were made, and provide that on notice.
Minister, why is the obligation on the agent and not on the vendor to disclose the information?
It is. It's on the vendor as well, Ms Hughes. So there's a raft of opportunities, as we just heard from the Fair Trading Commission, in relation to those agents who have identified in and around that area will have been notified, as well as owners' corporations and the like, to do the best catch-all, if you like, to inform consumers of the situation.
I don't think we can characterise this as a catch-all, Minister. Minister, why isn't the obligation on the contract for sale along with other disclosures?
It is, Madam Ms Hughes.
Well, are you certain of that, Minister?
Yes, I am.
Okay, can you point to the part of the Act where it puts the obligation on the contract for sale?
Find that part of the Act if you like, but also the Building Commissioner, we've had this discussion, and the Building Commissioner, I'd like to reiterate, please, Mr Commissioner.
Well, there's an obligation on vendors that if there are known defects in the properties for sale, that they disclose those properties for sale. Now, I can go and find the exact wording of the legislation for you. I don't have it at my fingertips, but vendors are required to disclose if they have known defects in their properties that are for sale. Now, my first port of call on the questions you've raised is that I'll have a look at the contracts for sale to see what's in the contracts for sale. So before I jump in, I'm just going to have a look at a couple of the contracts for sale as a starter.
Mr Chandler, you mentioned earlier that you were talking to someone about this yesterday.
Yes, I was involved in another project yesterday where there was an agreement developed between the developer and the owners' corporation to settle a litigation. So it's not a matter that I was specifically called into, but I went and had a look by way of interest. So I wanted to make sure that the owners' corporation understood that they should note that agreement that they just reached with a developer, and that they should acknowledge that agreement on the next minutes of the executive committee and make that available to all of the owners, so there's no way of avoiding it in the event of an incoming purchaser. Their solicitor should be able to do a due diligence, and what they do is they call in all the body corporate documents. So I just wanted to emphasise to that particular committee that, in fact, make sure that you record this agreement that you're entering into on the executive committee minutes and make sure that's available to every owner.
Minister, can you, and you might need to take this on notice, see whether these agents in those 5 examples were notified?
I will take that on notice, Ms Hughes, and I think the Fair Trading Commission is also trying to look at if they've, and expanding on that last answer.
Okay. Minister, I might move on to a different topic. Which I'm just having trouble finding my notes. Oh, actually, sorry. Well, Mr Chandler, do you have, you said you're going to come back to us on the interim occupation certificates in force. Are you able to then provide us with a number, how many of those have been audited by your office?
Yes, we could, but, and you know, let's not put any other version on it, that we are focusing on pre-occupation certificate audits, using our risk rating tools to do that. And that's now got a very high landing success where 80% of the buildings that we think ought to be or are likely to be presenting serious defects, 80% of the buildings that we're going in for pre-occupation certificate audits are in fact turning out to be representative of what we thought the risks that might be there. Now, in terms of buildings that have already got occupation certificates, at this stage we've been responding to, first of all, the ones that do become known to us. As you're aware, with our recent survey of owners' corporations, only 15% of owners' corporations advise fair trading that they have serious defects. So that's another area that we've got to do more work on, because that's really an ordinary number, that only 15% have advised fair trading. So our line of sight to that is not that great. But now that we have the e-planning platform up, and we can actually have a look back through all of those buildings and call in, we're focused on the certifiers that have actually had the highest presence in that space. So we're selecting a few at the moment based on that, and we're just about to start an initiative to go back and look specifically at buildings where we think there were high-risk certifiers, because that's likely to be the place where the ordinary interim occupation certificates were issued. So it's a work in progress. I'm going to say we're there yet, because every 6 months has opened up another area of discovery for us. But enabled by the digital capability that we've now got, it's unbelievable. I'm blown away every day by just the power that we have.
So, Mr. Chandler, I understand that the certification or the certifiers is one part of the risk element. We've also seen a pattern of behaviour from some particular developers here. Have you now audited all of the Top Place and Maris, if I'm saying that correctly, developments? Murhi?
Murhi? Well, I say Murhi, but
sure,
others say Mary.
I think we're talking about the same.
No, we haven't. Look, we have a series of investigations underway at the moment, and it's inappropriate for me to name those investigations. But you know, well, I hope you would believe that the frequent flyers in this space are getting lots of attention. And so I'd expect you that they would be reporting they're getting a lot of attention. Unfortunately, I can't name the projects, but we are going back through their legacy projects, and we will be taking those into the area of building works rectification orders, and then subsequently looking at the use of enforceable undertakings, which looks as though it's going to become a far more effective way of resolving some of these legacy projects than just leaving them to the owners to go through the courts.
Can I move on to the question of the issue at Imperial Tower, that's also known as the Hassel Street developments? A prohibition order was issued on the 5th of July for that particular project, which is located at 9 Hassel Street. Is that correct?
Yes.
And the prohibition order was then revoked?
Yes.
Who revoked that order?
The Director of Property and Building at Fair Trading, but let me be quite clear. I was aware of that decision because it was a part of a conversation with the developer to say, look, is it an unintended consequence that you've included in the order to ban the registration of the strata plan? And that wasn't the intent of the order, so that was an incorrect inclusion in the order. So we simply rectified the order, because the intent of the RAB Act is to in fact interfere with the issuance of an occupation certificate order, not to get into the transaction between the developer and its purchasers.
But Mr. Chandler, you would be aware that that by allowing the strata scheme to be registered, that then didn't allow the owners to exert their consumer protections under the sunset clause, that they are now essentially locked into purchasing this deeply defective building.
Well, it depends when the building is ultimately achieves an occupation certificate, but as I said to you, we are not focusing on interfering with the transaction between the developer and the purchaser, other than where we believe the occupation certificate should be delayed for substantial reasons. Then we will delay the occupation certificate issue, which is the transaction point where the purchaser moves from being a depositor to an owner. That's always been the intent of the RAB Act. It's never been any other intent.
And Mr. Chandler, I understand that that's your perspective as the Building Commissioner. Minister, what are you doing to protect those home buyers, and a large number of them first home buyers, who are now being forced to purchase against their wishes into this deeply defective building?
Ms. Hughes, I'll just firstly talk about, again, we're in the business of fixing buildings, not contracts, and Mr. Chandler has highlighted the error made. those...
Sorry, so your
Point
characterisation...
of order. The Minister has only just started his remarks. He should be allowed to finish his answer.
Yeah, I want a
before another
clarification
question.
on what he's just said, though.
Yeah, and then you can have that after he's provided his first section of answers.
Is it actually your evidence that you are not interested in the contracts for sale?
What we are interested in is, and what we do and are in the business of, are fixing buildings, not interfering with contracts, as the Building Commissioner has clearly stated. So what we...
No, Minister, I accept that that is his view as the Building Commissioner, but you are the Minister also for Consumer Protection. These are first home buyers, a large number of first home buyers and apartment buyers who have purchased into a deeply defective building, and because of the flick of a pen of a bureaucrat in your department, they are now being forced into this against their will. They had lawyers who were paid for, who were offered by the developer. Do you think that that is a fair process?
So, Ms Hughes, what happened in July when the prohibition order on the registration of the strata was issued did not interfere with the timing of the sunset clause of 30 November for when the strata registration was to be stood up. So in July, there was an unintended opportunity granted at that particular point in time. The error was quickly identified and it was fixed.
My time has expired, but I'll come back to this.
Thank you. I might just start and then I'll throw to Mr Shoebridge. Start with you, Mr Chandler, just picking up on the prohibition order issue. I think one of the first prohibition orders you placed, amongst others, was for 319 Liverpool Road, Strathfield South. Is that correct?
That was a stop work order, wasn't it?
I was reported in the Sydney Morning Herald as a prohibition order, but I'll leave it up to you in terms of what it was, because you issued it.
My recollection is that that was a stop work order.
Okay.
And with all of your good grace, we found that in fact there was a technical challenge to that stop work order, where I lifted that order.
Yep.
And very kindly you all consented to amend the legislation or the regulation, and now we're in a position to reissue that order. So all of you should take a bow on that one.
Okay. So when was it lifted from memory? Was it around the 18th of May? My notes.
Possibly. I can't recall the date, but it's not the Blacktown project, is it? It's Strathfield, isn't it?
Yeah, Strathfield South.
So we've lifted that stop work order, and we did that in conjunction with conversations with Burwood Council, because it's not possible for both of us to have orders on projects at the same time. So the council said that they would step in. If we lifted the order, they would step in and issue an order to stop work. Of course, their process of issuing a stop work order is not as streamlined as ours, where we issue and then the developer has to challenge our order. Councils actually have to go to the court and get the permission to issue the order. Now, the reality is that project hasn't yet recommenced construction. So we are keeping a very close eye on that project, because that project actually then lost its certifier. The PCA resigned. And so the only choice that was available to the developer was finally, after giving the council such a hard time, was to actually go cap in hand and get the council to become the certifier. Council didn't have the resources, and they've gone out to tender, and I understand just recently have appointed a certifier to help them be the certifier. There's a lot of work to be done before that project recommences.
But can I ask, you're not in a place to recommend certifiers yourself to these people if they lose their certifier, or there's an issue with the certifier they're using? Are you in a position that you have the power to recommend a particular certifier, or? A
regulator doesn't do that. A regulator says you've got a problem, but it's not going to tell you how to fix it. And we're constantly, for example, in wet areas in bathrooms, and we discover a bathroom that's simply non-compliant that's got to be pulled up. Well, the first thing the developer turns around and says, well, what do you want me to do to fix it? And say, well, go and get a proper design done and get it declared under the Design and Building Practitioners Act, and then do the job properly. But we don't ever say that certifier or that design solution. It's just that's not what the regulator does.
But as a regulator, do you have the option to reject a private certifier's findings or report, and then request them to go and get another one?
Typically what we would do is, if we had a residual concern, as we did, for example, at the Skyview project, is that I felt that I'm not an engineer. I wasn't in a position to form a view on the independent nature and quality of the report done on the repairs, so I went and commissioned an independent report. So where fair trading see the fact that there needs to be another party, as there is, for example, at 93 Auburn Road, where we're still dealing with the building works rectification order there, is that we're not satisfied with the developer's engineer or the developer's independent engineering advice. So we have just commenced going back into that project to get an opinion to advise the Director of Property and Building. Unfortunately, COVID's really quite extended that.
Sure. I might just go back to you, Minister, about the Property Services Commissioner. You've mentioned it in questions from the opposition. My understanding it was advertised early this year and the applications closed on the 5th of July. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So we still have yet to be... An appointment hasn't been made, or you said an appointment is imminent?
Yes, Mr Banasiak, an appointment is imminent. We're down to the last couple of interviews and got some fantastic candidates and just working through the last of the work that needs to be done before we are in a position to make an announcement.
My understanding that quite a few people were offered the job, but they turned it down. How many people were offered the job and then subsequently turned it down?
Well, it wasn't a case of offering the job. You go through different stages of interview process and through circumstances known to them, whether they be personal, whatever the case may be, chose not to proceed. So then we would then go back to an interview process and continue down that path.
It's my understanding that some of the reasons why people chose not to proceed was that they essentially saw the role as ornamental and not necessarily a robust commissioner like we have now with the building commissioner. And that was the reason why they opted to...
Can you cite those?
...not take up the offer or proceed further in the application process. What's your comment to that?
No, I reject that comment. As we've heard, some of the concerns where we've got work to do between the regulator and the real estate industry to make sure that, we are working together as one. It's a very important role, and this role is something that we've been working toward and certainly will have plenty of clout attached to it, Mr Banasiak. It's certainly not ornamental, I can...
Okay, so what powers will the Property Service Commissioner actually have?
So the Property Services Commissioner will report directly to myself and the Secretary.
That's not a power. What powers will they have?
So Mr Banasiak, the Property Services Commissioner will report directly to me and through to the Secretary. What they will be able to do will first and foremost look at the role of the regulator, look at the real estate industry, which is a significant economic contributor right across New South Wales, to basically look at some of those issues that we've talked about here today, just like the model that was built on the Building Commissioner, where the Building Commissioner came in, set up a small team and then looked at that problem. So we'll be doing the same model with the Property Services Commissioner. This is a very important role, Mr Banasiak. We're taking this very seriously.
Okay, but that's not a power. Looking at something isn't really a power. So once they've finished looking at it, what specific powers or enforcement actions will they be able to take? Like the Building Commissioner has now, he can issue prohibition orders, stop work orders, a whole range of things. What specific powers, regulatory powers, will the Commissioner have other than looking at things?
X-ray vision.
Perhaps X-ray vision.
Well, they might have X-ray vision, that'd be good, and a cape. So what that person will be doing in the first instance, let's get their feet under the desk, and then we will look at what's required, and just like the Commissioner, they'll be given the resources to do that role. So they'll report directly to me, they'll sit as a Commissioner, they will have the powers that will be required to do the work they need to do. So that will evolve as time goes on.
Will it be legislated?
It doesn't need to be legislated, Mr Banasiak. So again, this is a role that we take very seriously. We'll let the Commissioner look at what needs to be done, the resources, the work, the plan, and we'll appropriately resource.
Okay, what will be your remuneration for this Commissioner?
Have to take the number on notice.
Madam Secretary.
But it's a Deputy Secretary level role.
Deputy level. role, and part of their role will be to.
I don't think you might have another applicant, Avery.
No.
Your job, Wes.
Hey?
You're sick of the job, are you, Wes?
No.
Order.
Will part of the role be to work with the expert panel, or act as an intermediary between yourself and the expert panel?
That person will sit on the Property Services Expert Panel, where there's approximately 15 or 16 organisations across the real estate property sector in New South Wales currently sit on that panel, chaired by Chris Duggan. The Property Service Commissioner will sit on that panel and will work with them.
Okay. I note in your second read response to my property services bill when it came to your house, you said that you were working to try and get the Real Estate Institute of New South Wales back on that expert panel. What exactly are you doing to instill confidence in them to return?
Well, we are continuing to offer the olive branch. The Real Estate Institute of New South Wales is a key player in that sector. A key advocacy role is played by the Real Estate Institute of New South Wales, along with a myriad of other organisations. And the Real Estate Institute of New South Wales chose to withdraw from the Property Services Expert Panel. We sincerely hope, and we'll continue to offer the olive branch, that they will return to the table.
I think that's my time, but I'll have to come back to that, Mr. Shoebridge.
I'm just going to hop in very quickly and then go back to Mr. No, you're all right. Back to Mr. Shoebridge. Minister, I wanted to ask you about the National Construction Code minimum accessibility standards. Why isn't New South Wales joining the ACT, Victoria, Queensland, Tasmania and the Northern Territory in signing on to the 2022 National Construction Code minimum accessibility standards?
Thank you, Chair, for your question. In relation to the minimum accessibility codes, it was discussed at the last Building Ministers Forum, and New South Wales has chosen not to go down that path, purely because, one, the economic benefits in the first instance under COVID, where building and construction is needed to drive the economic reform of New South Wales and state and get it back on its feet again. So any further cost burden placed upon those particular operations was seen as disadvantageous. And in relation to making sure that those people who need those accessibility options, it's already there through Landcom and also through our social housing, where all of the social housing options are being done.
Do you accept that, given that we've got the ACT opting into these standards, Victoria, Queensland, doesn't it create needless complications for the construction industry across borders?
No, I don't think it does. Quite often you will see different states do different things in relation to the way that they run their building and construction sector. So what we've done is we've suggested a balanced proposal that involved developing a set of technical standards for both gold and silver accessibility that could be adopted by industry and social housing providers over time and applied in a targeted way through housing and the planning policies.
Thank you. In a letter to the Council on the Ageing, you stated that you, quote, fully acknowledge the benefits that accessibility housing can provide to the community, end quote. And you then go on to say that up to 30% of people may need accessible housing at some point in their life. Why then is New South Wales only requiring 20% of new apartments and 20% of medium and high density dwellings developed by only one specific developer to meet accessible housing standards? We have 30% needing accessible housing, and you're putting in place requirements for 20% to be accessible. Where are the other 10% expected to live?
So in terms of those numbers, Chair, Landcom will do 20% of all houses and apartments, and social housing will do 100% of that. So, and what we are doing is providing guidance in relation to those standards to those developers, should they take it up, and those guiding principles will be the benchmark going forward in the interim.
Do you know what the minimum standards are?
In terms of the silver standards?
Just off the top of your head. No, the standards that they've gone with in the National Construction Code.
So what we're looking at are the technical standards for both gold and silver accessibility, and it looks at basically bathrooms, it looks at staircases, it looks at access, car parks, lifts, wells.
They're pretty simple though, aren't they? Like it's things like at least one access to the building. So, someone comes to visit you who is in a wheelchair or can't go up steps, they can get into your building. So one access point to your building is all that's required under these standards. Having reinforced shower walls, not so that you have to put a railing in right now, but so that one could be put in the future by somebody. It's very, very minimum. Given the humongous benefits that would give for accessibility for people not just living in houses, but also to go and visit people in other houses, isn't it worth that tiny 1% or something increase in cost on the construction industry?
So in terms of what New South Wales is doing, we're doing a significant amount in relation to accessibility, Chair. Again, I go back to Landcom, 20% of all houses and apartments developed. Plus, there are those standards and those guidelines for both gold and silver accessibility. And should someone look at buying off the plan, then they can certainly have those discussions to say, here's what I'm requiring. So the options are there, and that's where New South Wales has landed, Madam Chair.
This government's really fond of saying that New South Wales is the best state in Australia.
Here.
See?
Very fond
It's
of
like
it.
you've trained them.
Green.
Why? Okay. Order. So why do you want to make it harder for people to age here than in other states and territories?
Make it hard.
I was certainly making it as easy as we possibly can for those, Madam Chair. We are, again, through Landcom, 20% of all houses.
No, that's one developer, and you've said this a few times now. The minimum accessibility standards were hard fought for because what's currently being done is not enough. Accessibility should be the norm, not the exception. Why won't New South Wales join in with the other states and territories?
Well, the proposal that building ministers were asked to adopt would have required every single new home or apartment to be constructed to these higher, more expensive standards. And as I said earlier, Madam Chair, adding significant cost to all purchases, regardless of their accessibility needs.
Yep.
So that's the challenge.
So our economy in New South Wales is so precarious compared to the other states and territories that we could not impose a 1% increase on construction companies. And yet, we're quite happy then for people without the ability to enter, 70% or whatever of houses to just basically put up with that.
At this stage, Chair, it's the balanced approach that New South Wales has taken to, one, stimulate the economy, plus also make sure that Landcom and housing, and New South Wales government is doing that now. When they're looking at
it really
all
makes
housing.
me worry about how precarious our economy is. Mr. Shoebridge.
Yeah. Minister, do you know how much the additional cost would have been for a housing unit to meet the minimum standards?
I can take that on notice, Mr. Shoebridge. I've got those numbers, but not in front of me at the moment.
Less than $3,000. That's what the discussion paper said, less than $3,000, so that people could age in grace in their home, that if they had a disability, they could stay in their home. Less than $3,000 for each new housing, and you've squibbed it and said no. How do you look people with disability in the face, ageing residents in the face, and say for $3,000 a housing unit, we've decided not to make housing accessible? How do you do that?
I'll just point to the ageing component that you're talking about, Mr. Shoebridge. The retirement village sector is one of the finest in New South Wales.
Want to live in their home, not go into not be forced into a house.
Point of order, Chair. Point of order. Point of order,
They want to be able to age in grace in their home.
Point of order.
Point of order. Point of order. Point of order. The Minister had barely started his answer when Mr. David Shoebridge rudely and I would say deliberately interjected.
Your points of order are becoming a little bit like commentary themselves, but I will remind Mr. Shoebridge not to speak over the Minister and vice versa. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Point noted.
Minister, you were not answering the question by talking about aged care homes. I was asking about people's ordinary residential homes. They want to age in their home. They want to age in place. And because you have not having New South Wales sign on to these standards, they won't be able to, will they?
We're talking about new builds here, Mr. Shoebridge.
Correct.
And the New South Wales government's already in that space in relation to providing accessibility levels through housing and also through Landcom. So there's significant work being done.
Victoria's providing that for 100% of new builds. We're providing it for 20% of builds from Landcom. You're not pretending that's dealing with the issue about having disabled access housing. 20% of Landcom in places in New South Wales, 100% of all new builds in Victoria. Why are we so behind the game?
Well, that's also a question for planning in relation to how they set up that. So if you have a chance to talk to the planning minister, that might be a question for him. But also in terms of building and construction, that's where we are. We want to make sure we drive our silver level. We want to make sure that we provide that guidance. We want to make sure that opportunities are there.
Yeah, basically you're putting profits to the property sector ahead of the needs of ageing and disabled people. That's the analysis you've done, isn't it, Minister?
New South Wales Government's doing significant work in relation to providing accessible housing for those that need it.
Yeah. Minister, do you have the document that I was showing you earlier?
The cladding document, Mr. Shubridge? Yeah.
No, Minister,
They're both performances.
something about this document, isn't it? There's something about
After
this
the break.
You could actually just, ask it.
If there wasn't so many
We can come back. We will come back. I'm sure there will be time, Mr. Shubridge. We are now required to have our COVID safe break. So go and be COVID safe for 15 minutes and we will come back at 3:45. Thank you.
We don't have this break, we're in trouble.
Yeah, right.
That's right.
Mental health break.
That one makes me cranky. Oh, it makes me really cranky. And then you would have, yeah, and then you would have extra demand for accessible housing.
What are you up to, mate?
You're on mic. I just want
Yeah, no, we're right.
Yeah, exactly.
No, don't need to read it. No more. I've got enough.
You got it.
I've got enough. Take it.
Good.
Take it.
Or you can.
No, good enough.
Oh, wait. I'll get an answer. I must say.
Well, so they're all there. Apart from this last one from Mr. Shoebridge, I've got to go up, so I'll
Cool.
Do we need to make copies of these? No, they're all there. All right, I'll be back. Is there anything else? How are you doing, Wes? Oh, good. How are you? Hot chocolate. Are you calling?
a job like rapping or something. You speak so fast.
I'm capable of speaking fast and slow.
Okay. And slow.
So I can do the crooning too.
Well, yeah. I can see you like in...
The RSL circuit for you, Junior, when this
I don't speak fast. You listen slow.
Yeah.
There's probably some truth in that. I'm not even joking.
Okay, it's 3:45, so I'm going to start again with questions from the opposition.
Thank you, Chair. And greetings to you, Minister. Always a pleasure to see you.
Likewise, nice to see you.
Minister, I'm interested in your response to the Mcdougall Review recommendations about Safe Work New South Wales. What is your response to the Mcdougall Review recommendations about Safe Work New South Wales?
Can you elaborate further, Mr Mookie, and I'll be happy to dig into whatever you would like to in that regard.
You've read the Mcdougall Review, I take it?
No, I haven't read the Mcdougall Review, Mr Mookie, but please give me some information in relation to the areas you'd like to discuss.
Do you know why the Mcdougall Review was commissioned?
Yes, I do.
Was it commissioned to undertake a statutory, amongst other functions, a statutory review into the State Insurance and Care Act?
But that's not a part of my portfolio,
Sure.
Mr Mookie, so...
Are you aware that also made certain inquiries into Safe Work New South Wales?
I'm aware of that, Mr Mookie.
And I think last time you and I were talking about this, Minister, you made the point that there was no specific submission that was put by your department or by you, at least in respect to your duties, as far as it relates to Safe Work New South Wales.
I'll ask the Secretary in relation to that, Mr Mookie.
I think you might be referring to a recommendation that Mcdougall made about...
Yep, we'll get to that, but I'm actually
could...
asking Secretary about whether or not the department had at any point put a submission in to the Mcdougall Review about any aspect of it as it relates to Safe Work New South Wales.
Not as it relates to Safe Work New South Wales, I don't believe, unless Ms Webb has an alternate...
Which, to be fair, was your evidence at the last estimates hearing that we had face-to-face as well. So there wasn't any change in
Then
position.
I would hope that would be right,
Yes. To be fair, you made that... I asked you in February and the review wrapped up in April, so I presume in that 6-week period you didn't. But, Minister, you are aware that Mcdougall made a recommendation about Safe Work New South Wales?
Specifically which one, Mr Mookie?
That's not my question. Are you aware that they made one?
I'll just check with the Secretary in relation to that.
I can't remember it word for word, but it implied...
Minister.
The suggestion was that Safe Work could...
I'm just happy to read
also
you the
undertake a
recommendation.
review.
Maybe that will just get to the heart of the matter,
Sure.
really. I was just wondering whether you were aware of it. The Minister, Justice Mcdougall said the responsible Minister for Safe Work New South Wales should conduct or commission a public review of that agency's performance of its regulatory and educational functions under the Work Health and Safety Act 2011, and that the report on that review should be made publicly available once it is completed. That is recommendation 49 of the Mcdougall Review. So let me ask you, are you going to act on his recommendation to commission a public review of Safe Work New South Wales' performance?
Mr Mookie, and the note that I have here is that recommended that the legislature consider amending that particular act as well as relevant legislation to clarify the objectives of iCare and Safe Work. The government will introduce legislation
Minister,
to implement his recommendation.
That's not what I asked.
In relation to Safe Work.
No, that's not what I'm asking. I'm taking you directly to recommendation 49. I'm reading it to you word for word. The responsible Minister for Safe Work New South Wales should conduct or commission a public review of that agency's performance of its regulatory and educational functions under the Work Health and Safety Act 2011, and that the report on that review be made publicly available once it's completed. And for the people following at home, the relevant part of the report is at section 35.5.2. So, it's a really simple question. The government has said that it has completed its response to the Mcdougall Review. It announced a response in August of this year, but the one aspect that is not clear as to what the government is doing is whether it's going to undertake this public investigation into Safe Work New South Wales, or review of performance of Safe Work New South Wales. You are the responsible Minister for Safe Work New South Wales, correct?
That's correct.
So, as the responsible Minister, are you going to be undertaking this review?
I think from recollection was that the response was that we noted noted the report and the recommendations.
No, that's the report. Talk about the recommendation.
I'll ask the Secretary.
I can't recall what the government's response was. It was either noted or that we accepted it, but we have not yet commenced a...
It's a really simple question to the government. I accept your answer. It's a government policy decision. Are you going to do the review or not?
I'll ask the Secretary in relation to where we're up to with that.
We have not commenced conducting a review, no.
Are you ruling out a review?
Well, look at. We noted the response, Mr. Mookie, so I think we'll leave it at that.
No. You might wish to leave it at that, Mr.
But can I
My
say
question
that,
is really
Can I say,
straightforward.
Mr. Mookie, what I will say is that, Safe Work continues to strongly perform its role under the WHS Roadmap New South Wales 2022.
Minister,
and
you
the
can't just
achievements
say
against
that.
that roadmap.
With respect. I appreciate the point you're making, Minister, but it really is a simple question. Are you ruling out a review? I understand that you've noted the review. At this point, no one can tell me whether the government's going to do the review, but are you, as the minister responsible, are you ruling it out? Is it a no? This review is not going to happen. Can you at least tell us that?
Well, I'm not ruling it out, Mr. Mookie, but certainly it was noted.
We've noted your answer.
We've noted your
answer,
answer.
Mr. Shoebridge.
Let's move on, Minister. Why not? Let's talk about silicosis. The National Dust Disease Task Force has recently completed a report, has it not?
I'll just get those notes just to be sure, because I don't want to mislead you, Mr. Mookie, in relation to silicosis.
We appreciate that.
I'm glad that you don't wish to mislead, and I don't wish to be misled. So that's a happy coincidence of interest. But you are at least aware that the Dust Disease Task Force has completed its report, yes?
Correct.
And have you read their report?
I've read parts of their report in relation to what we need to talk about as of 30 September 2021, Mr. Mookie, and the visits and the manufactured stone.
So are you aware that they recommended that if there is no improvement in regulatory compliance and evidence does not show that the preventative measures are keeping workers safe, that there should be a total ban on engineered stone from July 2024?
Well, Mr. Mookie, in relation to banning engineered stone, that's not something we would do.
Okay. I think you've just answered my next question, but my first question was, is you're aware that they made that recommendation? And my second question was going to be, do you think that there has been a sufficient improvement in regulatory compliance and evidence, which means that a ban should not be considered? Are we to imply, therefore, that you think that the enforcement measures, both in New South Wales and I guess for that matter nationally, have improved to the point where you don't support a ban?
Yeah, look, I can update you on New South Wales's position, Mr. Mookie. Certainly, as at 30 September, there were 318 visits to 144 manufactured stone sites, 189 silica-related improvement notices, 7 prohibition notices, 2 on-the-spot fines, and 24 businesses that could not be confirmed as meeting the workplace exposure standard of 0.05. So in relation to the improvement of the silica industry and what we are doing to drive down, then I think we are on the right track, and we'll do everything we can.
So therefore you're not supporting, or you don't think that the evidence supports a total ban on engineered stone from July 2024?
No, I do not.
Okay. Moving on. You recall us previously discussing silica exposure dust limits before?
Yes.
You remember at the time that the government moved from 0.1 to 0.05?
Yes.
You remember at the time that you said that the government would consider moving to 0.02 after further evidence?
Yes.
Where are we up to?
We're not there yet.
Well, clearly. What I mean is, in terms of the investigation of the further evidence that you flagged, where are we up to in that? What steps have you taken to investigate whether or not that 0.002 ban or limit is something that can be adopted?
Through you, Secretary, we'll ask Ms McCool, but I will say that at 0.02, it's very difficult, Mr Mookie, as you would appreciate, to be able to monitor something at that level. And many businesses that are doing the right thing by putting those dust measurement instruments in place are doing the right thing. But to get to 0.02, it's very, very difficult. But we'll confirm that through Ms McCool.
Before we do, though, to be fair to you, that's what you said last time. And then you also said that you would be investigating whether or not there's been sufficient changes to allow the government to consider that. What I'm asking is, I'm not asking you whether or not 0.002 is feasible right now, because you say it is not, I say potentially it is. My point is, where are you up to in terms of the additional steps of investigation that you flagged in your press release when you announced this policy? And if Ms McCool can help with that, that would be helpful.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you. In terms of the additional exposure standards, so Safe Work Australia are actually taking further investigations as to whether 0.02 is achievable within the industries. In the meantime, looking or have been accepted that they will introduce the same prohibition of the uncontrolled dry cutting of stones. So that would be within the national legislation. So that's an uplift from New South Wales. Equally, the code for manufactured stone will also look to be available by the end of the year. It's just waiting on all WHS ministers to sign up for that.
Thank you, Mr. Mcdougall. That's very helpful. In the March 2021 estimates, I think we were asking about numbers of grants, stone rebates that have been issued. I think the information that was provided to us at the time said that 82 out of the 255 known manufactured benchtop sites received a manufactured stone rebate or assistance of any type. Have we got any update on that number to the Minister or Ms McCall?
I will get that through Ms McCall.
Yeah, so we did have 4% of businesses taking that additional rebate. We're still tracking at the $500 rebate, which is always available. Throughout 1920 and 2021, we've had an additional $49,500 accepted since that previous rebate.
So how many businesses or sites?
There's been 99 Silica-related rebates under the $500.
Okay, so there's been an additional 17 in that period. Great, thank you. Moving on, Minister, you announced in June this year that we're hiring 40 more safe work inspectors. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And this is $6.4 million worth of funding?
Yes.
Are you recovering that funding from employers through premiums?
In terms of how that money is recovered, I'd ask the Secretary to elaborate on that, please.
That's not my understanding, but I will check with Ms Webb.
Can I just...
Question is, the additional $6.4 million worth of funding to hire 40 new inspectors, is that being recovered via premiums?
So the Safe Work Inspector is funded from the levy on the Workers' Comp Operational Fund, and that's the way in which the whole of Safe Work's operations are funded. So yes, if we increase the inspectors, it will come from that fund.
Okay, so we are accepting, Minister, therefore, that it's going up with premiums, that's correct? And the levy as well. Okay, fine. It's coming from that fund. Do you accept that? So my next question was, have you received advice as to whether or not that's going to put upward pressure on premiums or downward pressure on premiums?
I haven't received that advice, Mr Mcdougall.
Okay, well, it's still helpful that you are hiring 40 new inspectors. When do you expect these inspectors to be in place?
So that recruitment process is underway at the moment, and they're coming on board as they graduate. So those positions will be filled as they graduate.
But when?
And I'll get Madam Secretary to...
I think we've already commenced recruitment for those particular roles, but I'm not sure where we're up to with it, Ms Webb.
So we have commenced recruitment and identified a number of really good candidates. They will start their training courses quite soon. We have to do them in batches, so people will come on over the coming months as we can get the training ordered out for them, and they can be ready and available to start work.
No, that's helpful, but still doesn't answer my question. When are they all 40 going to be in place?
Well, how long does the training take there, Ms Webb?
Mr Williams is probably best to answer exactly that. I think the plan is to have some of them, depending on their experience, start some work even while they're still doing their training. Others might.
Okay, on notice, can you give us...
Will be quite...
On notice, can you just tell us when you expect the last of the 40th inspector to be out? Great, that would be really helpful. Kim, are they going to be put into the Safe Work Inspectorate, or are they going to also be included in the sort of general secretariat that's been formed by Better Regulation? Are they going into your general division as per your restructure, or are they being dedicated purely to safe work style inspections?
My understanding is they would be dedicated to safe work inspections, with the exception that all of our inspectors, regardless of division at the moment, are making a contribution to COVID safe inspections.
Which brings us to my next line of questioning, Secretary.
This is amazing.
In terms of what advice and guidance is Safe Work giving to employers currently and workers about their rights in respect to COVID exposures at their workplace?
It would be best for Ms Webb to answer that.
So we have been working very closely with Safe Work Australia, and both Safe Work Australia and Safe Work New South Wales have a range of information available on their websites, and we've also been contributing to the information on newsouthwales.gov.au, contributing to stakeholder roundtables with industry and employers, and the
I appreciate that,
education
but
as well. Yeah.
Well, what is the threshold before Safe Work New South Wales would trigger regulatory or enforcement action against a workplace? What are the tests you're using to decide? What is the standard that an employer and every other PCBU has to be held to before they will hear from you? Is there a regulation? Is there a guidance? What's enforceable here?
The standard, what the enforceable is what's in the regulations and the legislation.
So employers...
Guidance provides addition on top of that.
Employers, or all forms of PCBUs, which covers employers, workers and others, are really interested in how are they meant to acquit their general duty to provide a safe workplace as we reopen. Minister, what can you tell the employers, workers and other PCBUs of New South Wales as to how they should be going about acquitting their obligations under their general duty?
Yeah, on the website, Mr Mookie, there is a significant education, significant guidance about setting up a COVID-safe workplace in relation to compliance, QR codes, face masks, separation. It's a changing and dynamic environment, so there's education opportunities and plans online to assist them to operate safely.
What guidance are you giving HSRs about the steps that when it's appropriate for them to use their powers to stop work in the event that there is a COVID outbreak at their workplace? That's to you, Minister.
I'll ask the Madam Secretary in relation to that from HSR's perspective.
You'd be best, Ms Webb would be best to respond.
Well, look, on that then, Ms Webb, is there any specific guidance that is available to HSRs or any specific training that is available to HSRs as to how they can go about exercising their rights?
I might check with Mr Williams, otherwise I'll take that on notice.
Thank you. Certainly HSRs, as they deal with any risk in the workplace, have powers to take actions. They can certainly raise their concerns with
I know that. I'm asking what the guidance is. I know that. I'm just asking.
It's under well, I guess the guidance is covered by the general powers that HSRs have.
So there's no specific guidance?
The type of risk.
There's no specific guidance?
No, it's covered by our general risk requirements.
Great, thank you. Minister, I might move to another issue. 14 people were fined last financial year, for carrying on a business without a real estate licence. When officials from your department provided quite a detailed answer to my question last estimates about whether Darryl Maguire was conducting a real estate business without a licence, your office censored that answer. Why did you censor that answer by your officials as it was provided to the Parliament?
Thanks very much, Mr Graham. Regarding that question, on notice Fair Trading possessed insufficient information to provide definitive advice, and therefore a number of hypothetical scenarios were not included in the answer provided, so as to guarantee the accuracy of the response.
Minister, you're giving me now some of the information that you censored in the answer. Why cover this up?
Mr Graham, again, regarding that question on notice, Fair Trading possessed insufficient information.
Fair Trading decided not to investigate in this matter. They did so based on the transcript of that hearing. Did they consider in making that decision the extensive transcript of the ICAC that dealt with these matters?
Mr Graham, the matter is currently before the ICAC, and as such it would be inappropriate for me to comment at this time.
Well, it wouldn't be inappropriate to investigate, would it? Just because the ICAC is also looking at it, make it more appropriate to investigate, wouldn't it?
Mr Graham, again, regarding that particular issue, it would be inappropriate for me to comment at this particular time. I've given you my response in relation to the information that Fair Trading said that they were insufficient in possessing.
Yeah, but because the ICAC is investigating serious issues, serious potential criminality, doesn't mean you hang up your boots, Minister. You have obligations. What I'm asking you about the potential fair trading investigation here, did fair trading officials, in deciding not to investigate, examine the evidence that was publicly available on the transcript from the ICAC?
Mr Graham, again, I give you that information that I have, that they possessed insufficient information in relation to the definitive advice, and therefore a number of hypotheticals were put in place, and that's why they were not included in the answer provided, so as to guarantee the accuracy of that response.
Minister, there was ample evidence available on the ICAC transcript. It included this text message where Mr Maguire texted the former Premier the good news, in quotes, that, in quotes, one of my contacts sold a motel for 5.8 million. I had put her in contact, so I should make 5K. I want to know, was this evidence considered when Fair Trading decided not to investigate?
Again, Mr Graham, I understand your line of questioning, and I repeat that Fair Trading possessed insufficient information to provide definitive advice at that time.
And when you say that, can you give us any assurance they looked at the ICAC transcript, they looked at that evidence?
Mr Graham,
You're
it would
declining to
be
do that.
inappropriate for me to comment as the matter is still under investigation by ICAC.
I might hand to the Chair.
Thank you. Mr Banasiak.
Thank you. Just picking up on the where we left off, Minister, about the olive branch. Is it not true that the Real Estate Institute has indicated to you that they need to be filled with confidence that the property services expert panel will be something more than the Real Estate Reference Group, which they've described as a tit and flick exercise?
Well, thank you, Mr Banasiak, for your question. The Real Estate Reference Group was in the latter stages of my term when I came in. It was not operating then as it should, and they were in the process of disbanding when I took up this portfolio. As a result, I value the real estate property sector and what they do to the economy of New South Wales. In fact, what they do when you stay focused on the real estate agent's role is to create the great Australian dream. We want to make sure...
My question is...
You can't say that.
Has your office specifically been told by the Real Estate Institute that they need to be feel the confidence that this new panel that you've set up is going to be more than what the Real Estate Reference Group is or was?
I can tell you that under a previous regime of the Real Estate Reference Group is quite different to the Property Services Expert Panel that we've put up now with Chair Chris Duggan in relation to providing advice, and that's why the Property Services Commissioner will sit in on that panel and look to address some of those issues that Ms Hughes and Mr Graham addressed earlier.
Okay, picking up on that, and through you, Minister, can I just direct some questions to Ms Webb? In previous budget estimates, in line with questioning from the Honourable John Graham around continuing professional development being able to be completed within 3.5 minutes, Ms Webb stated something to the effect of, "We have certainly found nothing that suggests that you could do it in that sort of time frame." But however, Ms Webb, will you not send an email on the 28th of July 2020 from the Real Estate Institute which included a link to a YouTube video showing a registered training authority organisation actually performing this training within the 3.5 minutes?
So I think my previous evidence was that we needed evidence that the training could be done. We looked certainly at that YouTube video, but that we believe was not conclusive of what the allegation was there.
And what further investigation did you do beyond looking at that video? Given that video showed it could be done, what investigation did you do to ascertain whether it extended beyond that registered training organisation?
I think I just was going to say that we didn't accept that the video showed that it could be done. So I'll have to take on notice and ask the investigation team exactly what other steps they take and let you know.
Okay, thank you. Minister, you just spoke about obviously working with the industry, but can I draw you to a number of your media releases in relation to property services? And you can't find one that doesn't use inflammatory language designed to essentially denigrate the industry. And I'll read a couple. Government continues to crack down on real estate sector. Kevin Anderson said dodgy agents can be fined. We will continue to conduct these blitzes until the industry pulls its socks up. How is that conducive to a positive relationship with the industry, Minister?
Well, what we are doing, Mr. Banasiak, is making sure that regardless of the industry, then those who are doing the wrong thing do need to be held to account. So, you know, Fair Trading's taken action against 12 real estate agents for misappropriating $6 million from agency trust funds. So those people who have done the wrong thing need to be held to account.
Well, can I just pick up on that trust fund issue? Was it not the fact that the Fair Trading actually removed the need to report that caused that issue? And if we looked at that article in the Sydney Morning Herald, which I believe you're referencing, none of those 20 people that were named in that article actually took any of that money. All they did was fail to actually lodge a trust fund report. So my question to you is, have they not been unfairly or had their reputation unfairly tarnished to somehow score points because they didn't actually steal that money, you know, to spend on booze and alcohol like the article insinuates? They just failed to lodge a trust fund audit, which Fair Trading had previously removed the necessity to do.
So, Mr. Banasiak, I'm not referring to that article you're referring to. I'm referring to the facts as reported by Fair Trading, who have taken action against those 12 real estate agents responsible for misappropriating $6 million of funds from mums and dads who have put their faith in those agents who are doing the wrong thing, and subsequently Fair Trading took action against those agents.
Okay, well, through you, Minister, to Ms Webb or Ms Griswold, who is mentioned in this article, what level of responsibility does the department take, given that it was the department's decision to actually remove the necessity to actually lodge these trust fund reports, and then after we have all these issues arising, then put the requirement back in, causing confusion amongst the industry? What level of responsibility is the department taking in causing this mess?
Mr. Banasiak, I think there might be misapprehension here. That was a change in the legislation that said that the audited reports didn't have to be lodged. So it was the New South Wales Parliament that made that decision, not Fair Trading, and New South Wales Parliament that reversed it later and required them to be lodged.
Well, I'll direct it back to you, Minister. What level of responsibility are you taking since it was your government that flipped and flopped on this issue?
Point of order, Chair. That question was clearly containing argument, and I would ask you to rule that one out of order.
Well, there's no, to the point of order, there is no argument. It was your government that chopped and changed in terms of the trust fund decision.
To the point of order, Chair, I mean, you know, to use the term flip and flop and...
Well, change their mind. Does that satisfy you?
No, I would just ask Mr Banasiak to be a bit more measured in his language.
Thank you, Mr Fang. There is no particular ruling against the, or rules against the use of the words flip-flopping. I think we're okay at this moment, but I will keep an eye on it. Thank you.
So what level of responsibility will you take, Minister, for the chopping and changing of the trust fund audit requirements, given, you know...
Why are you flip-flopping on your language?
I'm sorry, flip-flopping, chopping and changing. You decide, Minister. What level of responsibility will you take?
Mr Banasiak, we certainly will make no apology for holding agents or anyone when they come to ripping off consumers. So in relation to the issue you're talking about, Fair Trading took action against 12 of those real estate agents, $6 million worth of mums and dads' money, the great Australian dream, and ultimately that's what you've got to stay focused on. If you rip that away, it turns into a nightmare, and then that's unacceptable. That's why Fair Trading takes the action it does.
Okay, so you're not answering the question. Great. I'll pass on to Mr.
Point of order, Chair.
No,
point of order.
Back to me, actually,
back
I
to you.
think. Yep.
Yeah, again, the commentary from...
we're just wasting time.
Yeah. No, but it's not acceptable.
Okay.
It is just not acceptable.
I understand. Thank you. So I just wanted to quickly touch on, before I pass over to Mr. Pearson, actually, he's got a bit of time in this round. I just wanted to ask, we were talking about the greyhound racing earlier. Minister, you referred to the fact that straight tracks are, of course, far safer than the traditional curved tracks. And I think we've spoken previously about our concerns about how delayed we are in rolling out straight tracks across the board. You will be aware that the new track being proposed in Tweed will have both an oval and a straight track. How is that consistent with the goal of reducing accidents and deaths on greyhound tracks?
Well, in relation to having the facilities where there is an oval track, a round track and a straight track, it provides the option, Chair, for participants to use the straight track or use a round track. So a round track, when created under the track welfare standards, is safe.
Is it as safe as a straight track?
They are of equal when it comes to being the correct welfare standard on a round track, and a safe track obviously provides a much safer option. But when a round track has the correct welfare standards and track strategy applied to it, the round track is also safe.
Okay, so in terms of kind of a hierarchy of safety, we have at the top straight track, then we have an oval track that is of the best possible standards as it can be, so presumably to do with the positioning of the lure, etc. And then below that, we have kind of some of the old tracks which have existing problems. So you're saying that an oval track that complies with the welfare standards is safer than ones that don't, but let's be clear, the straight tracks are the safest.
Just back to your point you made, Chair, about the position of the lure. What do you mean by that?
So, for example, when the animals, or when the dogs are going around the bend, a lot of the problem, as I understand it, comes from the positioning of the lure being on the bend as opposed to being across the track. And there are different ways that you can do that.
Look, I'd need some clarity on that, Madam Chair.
Okay. I don't think it's relevant to the question, though.
No, it is, but on the corners when you're talking about the safety of tracks. So the corner, just like imagine if you're driving around a corner in a car, if the road is leaning out, you tend to drift out. If the road cambers in, you stay on that corner. It's exactly the same, the welfare component of a greyhound. So that's where we're going.
That's fine, but are you saying that the straight track is not safer?
Oh, the straight track is safer.
Right, that's the point.
But what I'm saying is that the safety of a round track is greatly enhanced when it has that welfare track strategy applied to it.
Sure, the safety of the track for a greyhound is greatly improved when there's no greyhounds on it. But if we're talking about...
Opinion, Madam Chair.
No, it's not. It's actually just a fact. So we've established now, without a doubt, that the straight track is the safest possible track design. Why are we still allowing an oval track to be built in Tweed?
Because an oval track is perfectly acceptable with the welfare track standards that are applied. It's perfectly appropriate and safe for a greyhound to race around a safe round track.
Despite it being not as safe as being on a straight track, in more dogs die and more dogs have catastrophic injuries on oval tracks and on straight tracks, correct?
But quite often, Chair, the track might not be the concern in relation to a death or injury. There may be some other. That's why the Greyhound Welfare Integrity Commission...
But we just established that a straight track is safer...
Sorry to have to call a point of order on you. However, the Minister was answering the question when you just interjected.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Fang. I will remind myself to allow the Minister to respond in a directly relevant way, and I will remind myself that I can direct questions as appropriate as a member of this committee.
We all fail
There's no point of order. So we've established that a straight track is the safest track, and you were saying here today that it is perfectly acceptable and appropriate to use a track that is less safe for greyhounds, correct?
That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that when a round track has the appropriate track safety standards applied to it, it is perfectly safe.
Is it as safe as a straight track?
A safe track...
I feel like we just had this question.
We did have this question. Now we're going round in circles. Perhaps we should go straight.
I think we should go on a straight track, regardless of the circumstances.
There are options. There are options available, and the technology and the development of tracks is still being worked on. So.
There is no excuse to have a round track now that we know that straight tracks are the safest.
Well, that's your opinion, Madam Chair, but round tracks are perfectly safe.
But not as safe as a straight track.
They are safe.
Okay. I'm going to hand over to Mr. Pearson. Help us if you can, Mr. Pearson.
Thank you, Minister. But just following on to that, so what you're saying is you accept more catastrophic injuries and deaths in dogs running on a round track as opposed to that not happening on a straight track. Is that what you're actually saying?
My aim, as is Greyhound Racing New South Wales and the Greyhound Welfare Integrity Commission, is to have zero injuries and to have zero deaths. So every effort is being made to have that track welfare standards and those safety standards upgraded. That's why we've invested significant amount, like the 30 million in the Greyhound capital grants, to upgrade those tracks to ensure that they are safe.
Okay, let's move to whipping horses. And this is something I'd like to take you on this journey because it's going to be a very serious journey into the future for you. Professor Paul McGreevy, Professor of Animal Behaviour and Animal Science, published a landmark scientific study last year comparing the nerve endings in horses to human skin, and it confirmed that a horse can feel the same level of pain from whipping as a human, given. He stated that, quote, repeated strikes of the whip on horses that are fatigued as they end a race are likely to be distressing and cause suffering. Two terms used in the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act. A horse's loss of agency as it undergoes this kind of repeated treatment is thought to lead to learned helplessness. So this is the sport of kings. So, Minister, why doesn't the government acknowledge the peer-reviewed scientific evidence that whips do cause pain, suffering and distress to racehorses, and ask the New South Wales RSPCA to investigate as to whether the practice of whipping horses is in fact a breach of the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act, even if they whip it the right number of times according to the code? Because in the Act it says it's an offence to beat an animal, unnecessarily and unjustifiable, nor to inflict pain. Then the question would be, whipping a horse to run faster, is that really necessary and justifiable? And no doubt you would be aware that in Tasmania, the People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals is running a test case against Racing Tas on this very issue. So the question is, would you and your department look at this matter very seriously as to whether whipping should no longer be permitted?
Well, firstly, Mr Pearson, thank you for your comments. In relation to POCTA, that's not my remit, so you'll need to address that to the Agricultural Minister in relation to the prevention of cruelty to animals. I'm the Racing Minister.
I'll just clarify that for you, because I did know this was going to be a bit of a difficulty.
You're right.
So what you oversee in rules and regulations and codes of conduct allow whipping. It signs off on, yes, jockey, you whip, or you might get fined if you don't. So therefore, the activity under your watch could be authorising a breach of the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act.
Well, that's not quite right. So in relation to the issue of welfare and integrity in racing, it is of the highest level, and Racing New South Wales has very strict codes of conduct, has very strict rules and regulations and the codes of racing to ensure that animals' welfare is first and foremost, and that continues to be, and anybody who mistreats an animal is held to account.
I put to you, Minister, that the expert evidence now is that the regulation or the code that permits or actually directs a jockey to whip a horse is actually causing an offence under the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act. Now, you can have as many regulations and codes of conduct as you like, but ultimately they are subservient to criminal law. Cruelty to animals is a criminal act. So I'm just taking you on this journey because we have a case starting in Melbourne, in Tasmania. Victoria has flagged to the national body that it wants to ban whipping. And New South Wales has indicated already, Racing New South Wales, that it wouldn't even follow if the national body banned whipping, like Sweden, Norway, Denmark. Britain is heading that way, and parts of the United States. So this is where we're moving. And if Racing New South Wales is saying that we won't even follow that directive, even if it's a federal,
I'm not even sure where the question is.
Even if it's a national statement. So would you, Racing New South Wales, would you compel them to understand that continuing to whip horses is actually an act of cruelty?
Well, again,
Potentially an act of cruelty?
that comes under the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act, and that would be a question in relation to the Agriculture Minister. But Racing New South Wales has very strong codes. Their conduct is held in very, very high regard, and anybody who breaches those, in particular the use of a whip, is penalised severely. Welfare continues to be the number one priority when it comes to Racing New South Wales.
I will move on to breeding now.
I've got to make a point of order. I mean, Wes Fang continues to sort of take the high moral ground with interjections, but he's now
Thank you.
deliberately trying to put.
Yes, I have heard enough. If we could stop the interjections, that would be very useful. Continue, Mr. Pearson.
Okay, the greatest reputational risk to the horse racing industry, besides racetrack deaths, wastage and slaughter, is that, according to the RSPCA, around 13,000 thoroughbred foals are born every year in Australia. These figures are calculated based on Racing Australia Handbook. 2,000 of these foals will never be registered, and only 2,500 will eventually go to breeding, which means 8,500 adult thoroughbred horses will exit the thoroughbred racing industry every year. And of course, we know what happens then. Do you agree that there more needs to be done to reduce the breeding numbers, and for there to be a mandatory national identification and traceability system for racehorses, so that we know the fate of all horses, a bit like the greyhound, all of life tracking? Would you support that?
So there are discussions being held, Mr. Pearson, at a national level on traceability. So those discussions are ongoing, and I can tell you that in New South Wales, Racing New South Wales takes very seriously the welfare of a retired racehorse, just like they do with greyhounds in the rehoming, to ensure that their retirement is comfortable. So Racing New South Wales has a very, very strong program of rehoming, so that horses that are retired, that no longer either go to the equestrian or equine industry in relation to performance horses, looked after in their retirement.
Thank you. Back to the opposition.
Thanks very much, Chair. Minister, have you met with the Imperial Tower home buyers?
Personally, no.
Okay.
Not to my knowledge.
Have you met? Well, I assume that you would know if you had met with them. Have you met with any of the apartment owners from vicinity?
No.
Have you met with any apartment owners from defective buildings?
Yes, I meet with them from time to time.
How many would you say you've met with over the last 6 months?
Well, I'd have to check my diary. My diary is disclosed, so it's there for everybody to see, but I'd have to go back through, and I meet with many people, Ms. Hughes, so I'd have to go back through and be specific about it.
Could you name just one group of apartment buyers from defective buildings that you've met with recently?
Well, we've met with Mascot Towers on a number of occasions, but I'd have to go through my diaries, which are a public document. So you have access to those if you wish.
Minister, you spoke about, I think it was Mr. Chandler spoke about the Construct New South Wales report that said that 85% of defects aren't reported to fair trading. Can you tell us what proportion of those are resolved by fair trading rectification order?
I'd ask Mr. Chandler to provide those numbers, thanks.
It's on page 30 of the report. The table's a bit unclear.
And I understand the question. I'm just trying to put it in context. Ms. Hughes, so since the introduction of the Residential Apartment Buildings Act, that dial wouldn't have changed very much at all, because we still don't have many owners referring their buildings.
I understand. I was interested in the fair trading, the actual number of rectification orders. I've got a copy here if it's helpful of the table.
I've got the document here in front of me.
So it's on page 30, and right down the bottom it says, so at the top it's 4.3.1, defect resolution method. There's resolved by fair trading rectification order.
So it's on page 30, yeah, okay.
I mean, my reading of that is it's 1 or 2%.
Yeah, but that's not, that doesn't at this stage pick up orders issued under the RAB Act.
Okay, but it's 1 to 2%. Would you agree on that?
Yes, that's probably what it is, yeah.
Okay, and do you have a figure on the resolved by the Supreme Court order?
Well, that you can see that on a scale on the table.
Oh, so if we say that the bottom one is 1%, then that's perhaps 3%?
Could be, yeah.
Okay. And then we've got the tribunal order that's perhaps a little bit more, perhaps 4%.
Yep.
Okay. Mr. Chandler, do you believe that you have enough resources to do your role?
Yes, totally. These are resolutions in places that are not in the domain of fair trading. So, you know, there's enough resources. The challenge that we've got is to actually get owners' corporations to refer serious defects to fair trading in the first place. As you know, only 15% of people who do have serious defects refer them to fair trading. So we've got to ramp up our intervention, and we're certainly going to be doing that in the next 6 months, because we can see that from this data, we've got to lift this indicator, because it's not good enough.
So, but you feel that you have enough powers and resources to do your role?
Totally, yes, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
You couldn't use more inspectors?
No, not now at this stage. Based on the workload that we've currently got, look, you know, that's something that we monitor. If we're struggling with that, we would ask for some more. But at this stage, we're fine.
No more additional auditors to
Could I say it? Could I just say it once so it's clear? The answer is no. I don't need any more resources. Well, sorry, fair trading don't need any resources beyond what they've currently got to do this work.
Okay. Thanks very much, Mr. Chandler. Minister, what are you doing about the fact that 85% of serious defects are not reported to fair trading?
Well, as the Commissioner just said, Ms Hughes, there has to be better work done in that space to alert people to come forward so that they can get those problems fixed.
Okay, Minister, let's move on to another issue. Yesterday you announced, finally, the removal of some cladding under
They put it back on, though, at the end
Project
of the press
Remediate.
conference.
No, we didn't.
I acknowledge that interjection. Minister, you said that you might expand Project Remediate. How would that expansion, what would that expansion include?
So what I was referring to, Ms Hughes, was the work that's already been done by owners' corporations in remediating their building. We could certainly have a look at what we could do in terms of financial support for those buildings.
Okay, so will you allow applications to reopen?
No, we're not talking about the criteria, Ms Hughes. The cladding task force has that criteria set, so those buildings, and the program I think is the best in the nation. It's certainly attracted a lot of interest, keen interest from owners' corporations to be part of Project Remediate. So we won't expand the criteria, but what we will do is, and I'm open to having a look at supporting those buildings that have already been remediated.
Okay, well, you said that it's the best in the nation. I mean, I'm not sure that that's how anyone else would characterise this particular scheme. Can you explain why you think it's the best in the nation?
Look, I can, and Ms Hughes, we could be here all night if I was to read out from those who have praised this particular project in relation to the way we are doing it. The time taken to methodically get it right, I think, is something
no one's disputing you've taken your time to roll it out, Minister. You have
Point of order.
taken your time.
Point of order, Chair.
No, I'm happy. Let it ride, but I'm happy, and thank you.
Happy, he says.
Yeah, look, I'm happy.
No, I
thanks.
mean, he's a very capable minister,
Doesn't
and he
need
can
your
actually
ways.
smack it down. But it's just a
Doesn't need your
Waste of time. Just here.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But thank you.
Continue.
But certainly, we've taken the time to properly design it, and I can give you those industries that have said that this is the right way to go about removing combustible cladding from buildings in New South Wales.
Okay, well, perhaps the low subscription rate might be a little bit of an indication that it's not actually going to achieve what it's setting out to do. But, Minister, can I just ask you, how many unsuccessful applicants were there?
So where we're at the moment is that there were eligible buildings of 274, high-risk residential buildings eligible for Project Remediate. They will go through that criteria assessment by the cladding task force, and ultimately they will then be triaged like we started yesterday to remove that cladding. So at present, Ms Hughes, there's 155 buildings that have opted in to Project Remediate. There's 290 buildings or 290 registrations for Project Remediate. Now, that number is up on where we were originally because, again, people are now seeing the value of being able to, the quality, the compliance, the fact that the building will be returned as an insurable building and ultimately will attract DLI on new buildings in New South Wales. So this is a
Minister,
program.
Can you just first, let's just go through those figures. Sure. There's 155 buildings that have opted in with 290 registrations. Can you just explain what's the difference there?
So the eligible buildings as assessed by the cladding task force is 274, but there were a number of other owners corporations that are now seeing the value of Project Remediate, the fact that this will be expertly done, and they don't have the capacity quite often or the capability to be able to do this work themselves. So they've put their hand up and contacted the cladding task force and said, can we opt in?
So Minister, what you're saying is that there are 290, we could characterise those as expressions of interest, registrations. Registrations, yeah. Right. And did all of those 290 actually complete application forms?
No, so 274 were eligible, but the task force reviewed 89 of those, and the numbers were that there were actually 5 of those buildings, Ms. Hughes-Sauce, that were actually not high-risk Class 2. There were 18 that actually didn't have any cladding on them at all.
Sorry, when you say they reviewed them, they reviewed the 274 or they reviewed the 290 registrations?
290.
Okay, they reviewed the 290 registrations. So those registrations completed an application form, is that correct?
Well, they would have contacted through the cladding task force to register their interests.
Okay, but I'm asking a very specific question. Did they register their interest or did they complete an application form? The application form's pretty lengthy.
Mr. Chandler.
No, they would have registered their interest online, and
okay.
that would have then commenced.
Triggered.
That would have triggered then a review of those applications. So 290 people have put their hand up. Of that, 155 have been accepted into the program. 46 of those were not eligible, and there's currently 89 being looked at by the cladding task force to see if they in fact should be considered as admissible.
So 89 is still being reviewed. We've got 200
cladding task force, yeah.
Okay, so we've got 274 buildings that are eligible.
Correct.
You received 290 registrations.
Correct.
Of those, 155 buildings have been accepted, 89 are still being reviewed.
Correct.
And there's 5 buildings that weren't eligible and 18 without cladding. Is that correct?
And also, in addition to that, Ms. Hughes-Sauce, 23 were cleared by the consent authority.
Okay, so... And you are not reopening applications, is that correct?
Certainly. Look, if there are buildings that, again, because Project Remediate has been widely received, there are those who now are believing that this is the way forward, so they are contacting the cladding task force to get advice as to whether their building is eligible. But those, we started with 4,000 buildings and worked our way down to where we are today. So, thanks to Fire and Rescue and the cladding task force.
Minister, I've been here through the estimates. We've been on this journey together. I don't need to recap. I just am asking you, are you going to reopen applications?
We certainly won't be looking to deny if someone wants to contact the cladding task force and believe that they are high-risk Class 2 residential, then if they need to be included. But again, most of those have already been audited and tracked through the cladding task force and the consent authorities with the councils who would have them on their books.
So, Minister, will there be capacity to add additional buildings to the program? Yes or no?
If it turns out a Class 2 high-risk residential, then certainly the cladding task force would take that into consideration.
Okay, that's not actually answering the question. Minister, when will the program be completed?
Nor is yours.
When
Mr.
will the
Payne.
program be completed?
It will be completed on time in 2023.
2023. And what happens if the projects run over time?
it will be completed on time in 2023. That's why Project Remediate Now is being held up as the golden ticket to remove flammable cladding of high-rise residential buildings as the gold standard.
Okay, Minister, my time's running very short, so I just need to ask you a couple of other questions. Minister, we've seen many travel plans forced to be cancelled during COVID. A new report from Choice was released yesterday showing that a quarter, only 1 in 4 Australians, feel confident booking flights, accommodation or other travel services in the next 12 months. Will you now commit to providing improved legal protections for travellers?
So very shortly, Ms Hughes, the Consumer Affairs Ministers meeting will be held where we'll be looking at a raft of options to, again, see if something can be done to strengthen consumer protection when it comes to travel and accommodation. And COVID has thrown plenty of curveballs, and for those that have certainly missed out, our heart goes out to them. And we'll be taking a number of options and having a look at them with the Consumer Affairs Ministers meeting coming up shortly.
Okay, and I'm sure that they appreciate that your heart goes out to them, but they're looking for more concrete. They're looking for a concrete response. Choice has now released 2 separate reports on this issue. Have you read either of those reports?
Yes, I have, Ms Hughes.
Okay, and have you considered their recommendations?
We'll be considering lots of different options and in relation to providing protection for consumers, one of the areas that we are looking at is the contracts and terms and conditions, and that includes along the lines of a look before you book education campaign.
Got a good ring to
That's a very good campaign, thank you. Look before you book. I'm breaking it right here today.
At least a couple Facebook posts.
There we go. We got the exclusive. Look before you book campaign.
Is there a logo?
We are.
It's got 2 eyes.
We're taking it very seriously, Ms.
Have a drawing competition, David. You can enter.
Consumers are at the forefront of what we are trying to do.
Let me just be really clear, Minister. Travellers have lost thousands of dollars. They have lost so much time chasing this money, and they are not looking for more promotional campaigns about looking before they book. They are actually looking for improved legal protections that will guarantee them refunds, that will actually ensure that they don't have to either sacrifice their hard-earned cash or their legal protections. They're actually looking for you to take action. Will you take action? Or will you continue to just encourage tell fair trading to encourage people to act fairly?
So part of what you're talking about there, Ms Hughes, is national law. That's why consumers ministers are meeting to look at what can be done at a national level. And certainly from a state's perspective, I'll be taking several options forward, and we'll be having those discussions to better protect, if we can, consumers.
Yes, but New South Wales did lead the way on gift certificates, and at the moment you have more protections with your gift certificate from Westfields than you do when you spend $1,000 on holiday accommodation.
So COVID again has thrown a curveball, and what we are looking at is that look before you book campaign, Ms Hughes, which will encourage people and try to look at those contracts, you know, where it's right at the bottom, where it's really tiny print and it's late and you go, oh, I can't be bothered reading that contract. Yep. We're going to encourage them to bring that to the forefront to better educate consumers as well.
After 18 months, you've got a social media campaign. I'm sure that travellers will be really excited by that.
Social media campaign.
I might turn questions now back to the Building Commissioner if that works. Commissioner, you've taken us through those prohibition orders, the 9 of those that have been issued, and I thought that evidence about the audits, that you're actually turning up to the places now that do actually have the risks. Your model, the
ones that are putting their hands up,
your model to predict the risks is getting better and better.
Yep.
I think the thing that'd be helpful, the thing I'm struggling to get my head around is just who exactly is doing this. A lot of the media discussion is about individual buildings, but and the Parliament doesn't have a very good grasp of the structure of the industry. You do, given the work you're doing and the look you've had around the industry. What classes of developers or what groups are the problem here? Who's the problem here when you look across the industry?
What we've done in the last 18 months is that we've really joined up all of the prior data silos that existed across fair trading, and we now have what we call a single view of building. Now, we also, inside BRD, is the investigations unit. So we've actually joined up the investigations unit into this work plan as well. Now, the investigations unit inside BRD holds one of the largest data assets of intelligence in the country. So they look at, first of all, the character of the player.
I'll just stop you there because I don't want to know how you do it. I want to know your view about who is the problem, which developers are the problem, which class of developers, or where's in the industry structure, who is causing these problems?
The strongest indicators that actually lead you to the developers that cause the greatest strain is safe work. The big indicator is the number of safety breaches that have occurred by the builder during the course of construction. That's by far the loudest bell.
That's the red flag.
That's the loudest of the bells. The second of the bells is whether it's one of the riskier certifiers that is in our domain. So generally, those two things land you right on top of the most risky developers. Now, there are a range of risky developers out there that are not the ones you would imagine they are. So, for example, the one in Kiama the other week, for example, we got to that by simply joining up the safe work data and the certifier data. So don't just imagine that the top 5 to 8 developers are simply the issue here. It's 20% of developers.
And how would you describe those most risky developers? You're describing how you find them, but when the Parliament's looking at the industry, it's very opaque. It's lot of these. Part of the issue here is there's individual companies around a lot of these buildings, so it's impossible to tell who's who. Who are these risky developers? Now you've had a good look around.
They're typically people who don't have a known brand or business. So we're looking for people that typically have an address at an accountant or lawyer's office. So they're not people that actually have
or an accountant's office.
More often a lawyer's office, but sorry, I withdraw that. That was sort of a flippant remark. But so it's an accountant or a lawyer's office of address of convenience. So we look at that. And we're also now looking at the power that we're looking at is source of finance. So, for example, we can now join up our data assets to look at the Land Registry Service and see who is the registered financier on title, because anyone who's loaning money to a project would ideally make sure their interests are secured on title. So we see that, and where we don't see a legitimate source of funds, there's another pointer there. So all I can say is that there are very many pointers coming together at the moment that target these people. Now, the flip side of that is that we want to make a distinguishment between who are the trusted players and who are the less trusted.
Which makes a lot of sense.
Okay, so the work that we've been doing...
No, and I accept that. Looking at some of the people you have already put these prohibition orders on, one of those, the one that up till recently it sounded like might have been the worst building, that 93 Auburn Road, Auburn. It's I think a Goldenia development firm. You said it was a Mehi development. Is it, how much, if there's a problem here, the worst building, and then seeing there are other problems with those same groups?
Yes, those same groups are presenting buildings with similar issues. And right now we would have probably 15 buildings under investigation by some of the repeat players. But the journey does take some time, because one of the things that you discover very quickly in this role is that, in fact, some of these players are prepared to spend more money on litigation than they are on building it right in the first place. So it staggers me that the money that they're prepared to spend on lawyers, in fact, had they just applied that to doing the job right, they would have got a nice job out of it. So I expect that over the next 3 to 6 months, you're going to see quite a lot of orders being issued onto these repeat players, but it does take some process.
But you are seeing repeat offenders, though.
Yes, we are. That's one of them, for example, there's 5 buildings that are, but we're getting them before OCs now.
No, exactly. And who is that player, for example? Are you in a position to tell us?
No, I don't think so, because I think what we ought to do is just let due process wander out here.
Understood.
Because the media would immediately assume that it's someone that they can think of.
I accept that. It's just whatever you're comfortable saying.
It's not the person
today.
they would think of, okay?
You're clearly looking at the top, one of the top place properties, and they have a range across Sydney. Again, are you comfortable saying anything about that?
No, I'm not, because one of the things that I'm doing in working with these people is that some of these developers sort of look at themselves and say, well, I'm way back in terms of history, but I want to be in this place in the future. So I can't close the door on people actually who are prepared to move to a different playing game. So I'm working with a number of developers that if they say to me that they are going to go back and fix their legacy projects, until they stop doing that, then I'm going to take that at their word. So one of the players that you may have mentioned is continuing to turn up and saying, each time you spring me with a bad building, I'll go back and fix it. Now, until that doesn't work, okay, but there's a range of other players out there. So, there's some constructors out there that are sort of habitual players in terms of shutting down their businesses. And we've got another 3 or 4 of them at the moment that we're working on.
Now, I have to get to ask you this, which is up until you said 93 Auburn Road, Auburn was the worst building you'd seen at that date. Earlier in the what have you seen?
I said maybe it's not.
Well, have you seen anything since that's had you more?
Again, the good thing about it is the ones that we may have seen that could have challenged that reputation, we've got them before an OC audit. So when you see them, they'll be very much better.
No, thank you.
I wanted to come back to the question of prohibition orders. How many have been withdrawn, Minister?
I'll have to ask the Building Commissioner in relation to those operational matters. Thanks.
Sorry, back to you, Mr. Chandler.
Like I say to you that I don't have all the numbers these days welded in my head because, and I need to do a weekly, so there have been 6 prohibition orders withdrawn.
Okay.
Are you right?
Oh, sorry. Can I just ask one final question, which is, and how many have been challenged in the Land and Environment Court?
There is 1 prohibition order being challenged in the Land and Environment Court. There are 2 building works rectification orders that are for challenge. One of those we took through the Land and Environment Court, and I'm pleased to say that we won it.
Okay, excellent.
Okay, so we've got one currently in the Land and Environment Court, but one that took us to the Land and Environment Court, and we won that, and we also had costs awarded in our favour.
Thank you. Mr. Shoebridge.
Oh, thanks, Chair. Minister, the round before last I gave you a document.
Yes.
Yes, have you got it in front of you?
Yes, I do.
I thought we'd start on it.
Yes.
So, Minister, can I ask you to look again to that page which has the 2 walls, one with aluminium cladding with cavity barriers, which is consistent with Project Remediate. See that?
Yes.
And one on the right without cavity barriers, which is consistent with the Building Code of Australia. Do you see that? Minister, have you seen this before?
This is part of a briefing that the Building Commissioner put up, but it's a myriad of many briefings that we've had on behalf of the Building Commissioner. But please go on, Mr. Shoebridge.
I just asked you if you'd seen it before.
Yeah, it would have been in a briefing that I think in July the crossbench would have been given.
Yep, but Minister, have you seen it before?
Yes.
Good. That was easy. When you saw this and you realised that fire could spread like that on aluminium-clad buildings, which are being built consistent with the Building Code of Australia, what did you think?
Just 1 second, Mr. Shoebridge. Mr. Chandler is offering some advice in relation to that.
I'm going to come to Mr. Chandler next, but he can't tell you what you thought.
No, he wasn't telling me what he thought. He was giving me product classification.
I'll come back to that because there's another image which Mr. Chandler can help with. So do you remember what the question was?
Yes, I do. And can I say that buildings that have been remediated already in New South Wales would have complied with the Building Codes of Australia, and they would have had declared designs if they were done after July 1. So they would have been captured under the DBP Act. Is that where you're going in relation to whether they are complying with the BCA?
Minister, I was asking you what you thought when you saw that buildings constructed under the Building Code of Australia with aluminium cladding can have the entire wall burned like this. I was asking what you thought when you saw that.
Well, it's
It may have been nothing, but I just want to know what you thought.
No, I understand that. Look, and not just in relation to that particular image, Mr. Shoebridge, any image where a building has fire or engulfed in flames, whether it be a class 1 all the way through to a class 10, is quite distressing.
Yeah, so what did you do?
In relation to
the fact that buildings can be built right now and are being built right now with this form of aluminium cladding on their walls, which can see the entire wall catch fire and burn like this. What are you doing about it?
Well,
you say it's distressing. What are you doing about it?
If they built after July 1, they would have had to have complied with the building codes of Australia in relation to getting those buildings rectified, Mr. Shoebridge.
No, Minister. What you see there is compliant with the Building Code of Australia. It's compliant with the deemed to satisfy provisions under the Building Code of Australia. There's a prior slide in this set that says that. What you're seeing there is compliant with the Building Code of Australia.
Mr. Shoebridge, any building that would have been remediated under the Building Code of Australia would have had to have been then signed off by the consent authority.
That's compliant with the Building Code of Australia.
Yeah, but if they are as part of the Building Code of Australia, then they are deemed to be appropriately rectified.
Yep, but Minister, they're putting this on, like this. And it's a major fire hazard, and it's compliant with the Building Code of Australia. Saying that it's compliant with the Building Code of Australia doesn't remove the hazard. Do you understand? That the whole wall caught on fire.
If it wasn't compliant, Mr. Shoebridge, then it would not have been able to be passed by the consent authority.
I'll start again. What you see there is a wall that was built compliant with the Building Code of Australia. And even though it was compliant with the Building Code of Australia, when a fire was put to it at the bottom, the whole thing burnt. Just like Grenfell Tower burnt. The whole thing burnt, and it was compliant with the Building Code of Australia. Do you understand that?
Mr. Shoebridge, if it was compliant with the Building Code of Australia, it would have been signed off by the consent authority, and if it was not compliant, then it would not have passed.
Yeah, so that's right. It gets signed off by the consent authority as compliant with the Building Code of Australia, but the whole thing catches on fire, and it's a major fire hazard. What you don't seem to understand that this is happening all the time on thousands of buildings across New South Wales. It's a major fire safety hazard, and you're not doing anything about it because you don't seem to understand the issue, Minister.
So I do, and what I am gleaning from you, Mr. Shoebridge, is that you appear to be unhappy with the building codes of Australia and the materials that are being used to make those buildings compliant.
Dead right.
That's
and why
your
aren't
view.
You?
That's your view.
That's my view because you provided the evidence in a briefing which showed the entire wall catches on fire.
So under Project Remediate, we're setting a very, very high standard in relation to the remediation of unsafe buildings that have cladding in them.
Yeah, good. That's great. Tick. That's for 200 buildings. Meanwhile, every other building that's been built with cladding across New South Wales is all able to put this stuff on. This is the cheapest, most common remedy for cladding. It's happening everywhere, and it's a major fire hazard, and you can't even see the issue, Minister.
But it's compliant with the Building Code of Australia and signed off by the consent authority. Mr. Shoebridge, if you've got an issue in relation to a particular product, very happy, bring it forward and put it into the Cladding Product Safety Panel.
I don't have the issue. Your own tests showed the issue. If you test it under AS 5113, you see the issue. The slide that you gave to my office shows the issue, and you're not doing anything about it.
In relation to the building codes of Australia, Mr. Shoebridge, and if the Building Commissioner would like to elaborate on that particular product, but it does comply.
Yeah, I know it complies, it's a problem.
And the consent authority would not have signed off on it if it did not comply.
Minister, there's a major safety hazard out there. And what is frustrating me most about this conversation is you don't seem to understand that just because it's compliant with the Building Code of Australia, and all the flammable cladding that was put on by Grenfell was compliant with the Building Code of Australia, just because it's compliant with the Building Code of Australia doesn't mean it's safe. And you're not doing anything to fix the code. And why not? Is it because you don't understand the issue?
Can I just take you back to where you said Grenfell? Did they comply with the Building Code of Australia?
It all complied with the Building Code of Australia. All that cladding that was whacked on was compliant with the Building Code of Australia. And we had ministers saying, it's all fine, don't you worry about it, it's all compliant.
No, I don't think you can.
I don't think we're in a position to say it was compliant with the Building Code of Australia. It was compliant with whatever codes in the UK.
All the flammable cladding that was put on consistent with the flammable cladding that was put on Granville. All of that was compliant with the Building Code of Australia here in
Well, I think
Australia.
that's a big stretch. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no. I can't comment on that, Mr. Shubridge, but what I can say is that those buildings that have already been rectified with cladding under the Building Codes of Australia were signed off by the Consent Authority and deemed compliant.
Well, Minister, I think probably the transcript will just have to stand for itself. And I'm going to ask you this simply: Are you going to make efforts?
Actually going to have your size.
Are you going to make efforts to change the Building Code of Australia to make properties safe and to prevent entire walls going up like this?
So the Cladding Product Safety Panel does very good work in relation to the products available for cladding. They'll continue that work. They're onto the second tranche now, Mr. Shubridge, and they'll continue to ascertain the criteria required to make them safe with the Building Codes of Australia.
Look, I'll tender that. I'll hand that up for
Thank you.
Just two quick questions. Building Commissioner, do you have power over boarding houses? Because a lot of multi-storey buildings at the moment are going through approval processes under the Planning Act as boarding houses to get planning benefits. But, I mean, obviously there will be significant building issues in relation to them. Do you have power over boarding houses?
Again, this is for the Minister to announce, but there would be an extension at some date in the future of the buildings that were beyond Class 2 at the moment. Those powers apply to Class 2 buildings, Mr. Shubridge.
So does that no? That you don't have power over
The answer is no, I don't, but where boarding houses are part of an integrated development involving a Class 2 building, yes, I do.
Yeah, but if it's a boarding house by itself...
If it's on its own, no.
Yeah. Well, Minister, don't you think it's appropriate the Building Commissioner has power over boarding houses, given they've got many of the same issues of Class 2 residential buildings?
Well, at this point in time, our focus is on those Class 2 buildings, those high-rise residential. We'll certainly be looking at further down the track in terms of what that needs and should happen. But at this point in time, it's Class 2 high-rise residential. We've got plenty of work in front of us, Mr. Shubridge.
So I'm now forced to ask you, Commissioner, do you think you should have the power over boarding houses, given many of the same issues arise for boarding houses as Class 2 residential?
I think in the next tranche of buildings, it would be desirable to have boarding houses in it, in the next tranche. But, you know, the legislation was very clear and says, let's get Class 2 stood up, let's resolve all the unintended consequences and then look to move the edges out. It would be desirable. Yeah. The answer is yes.
Commissioner, it's very hard to drive dodgy certifiers out of the industry. Do you know Vic Lilly is still a member of the Association of Australian Certifiers and still being promoted as a certifier? What does it take?
Mr. Shubridge, I can say that Mr. Lilly is not a PCA working on any Class 2 building. I don't think that there's a developer that would be game to even engage him for that. So he's pretty well iced in terms of that space. The fact that AAC still entertain him as a member is something that we'll take up with professional associations. In fact, I'm swinging my interests across to AIBS because I believe that AAC has yet to demonstrate their bona fides in terms of representing a professional body.
It's harder to get off the list than get on the list with AAS, isn't it?
It looks like a bit of a club that you could join at the door, but...
It's all right.
You're done? Thank you.
No, it's all
right. Thank you. If I could turn now to the Subsidence Advisory New South Wales in relation to mining subsidence, which I flagged in an earlier session. Let me know who to direct these questions to. I've got a number of questions about the... Sorry, who...
Fire away, you're right.
Saying you go to Ms Webb initially and she can read.
Sure. Okay, let me start with Ms Webb, and by all means, Minister, if you want to cut in, please do. Ms Webb, who is the Chief Executive of Subsidence Advisory New South Wales?
It's Mr Joe D'Amelio.
Sorry, Mr Joe D'Amelio?
D'Amelio.
And how were they appointed?
I think we had I think he was appointed laterally to that position, and we had the reorganisation of the regulation division.
Okay, so he's effectively a public servant, yes? He's within the department employee, he's not a separate...
That's right. No, he's a departmental employee.
Okay. How long is he appointed for? Is he appointed just as an employee or is he appointed for a period of time?
No, it's a permanent appointment.
Okay, it's a permanent appointment. Could I ask you, what is the minimum amount that's required in the mine subsidence fund?
I'd have to take that level of detail on notice.
Thank you. Also, whether the minimum amount required in the fund has increased or decreased over time?
Depends what time frame. Perhaps I'll take it on notice, but it might just be helpful because there was quite a substantial change to the fund in 2017, 2018.
Thank you.
So
yes.
if I could since that date.
Since the date that it changed, that would be useful. And since Subsidence Advisory New South Wales took over from the Mine Subsidence Board, the total leviable contribution has decreased by what looks to be just over $750,000. Can you explain why that is?
Again, I'll elaborate on notice, but very briefly, my understanding was that when the law changed, the requirements for the amount we needed in the fund changed as well, so therefore the levy could be decreased.
Yes, so the levy has been decreased just recently, actually, in a new regulation. You would be aware of that?
Yes, that's right. It's reviewed regularly.
Okay, it would be useful to know why that was and on what basis that gets reviewed, because it doesn't seem clear from the regulation or the enabling act either. Are you able to tell me how many times the Chief Executive has made payments from the fund to reimburse Tamua Coal for compensation payments for mine subsidence?
Sorry, I don't think I've got that exact number here. I'd have to take that on notice.
Okay. Are you able to also tell me how many properties have been purchased as a result of subsidence claims?
Overall, or?
Yeah, overall or by year. Are you if you're taking it on notice, it would be useful to get it by
year.
Sure. If you could tell me how many have been acquired through a compulsory acquisition process, and also how many of those properties have been sold, that would be useful. I take it you have to take that on notice.
Yes, I would, yes.
And importantly, how many properties have been sold at a profit?
Yes, we can definitely add that in. Yes.
Thank you. Minister, are you aware that that this fund, sorry, I'll get the name of it again, it's the Coal Mine Subsidence Fund, makes money not just, or makes a profit rather, not just from investments that it makes using the money from the fund in various places, but also through basically flipping properties. So it will go and, the Chief Executive will go and purchase a property that is impacted by subsidence and then fix it up and then sell it for a profit. Are you aware of that happening?
No, I'm unaware of that happening, Chair.
Perhaps I could ask you to have a look at that. As I understand it, although the profit gets booked to the sort of total amount of the fund, so does the losses from the investments as well as the profits, I guess, from the investments. But the end impact of that is that the coal mining companies who are required to pay into that fund are then required to pay less because of that property flipping. And I think you can probably understand where I'm going with this, but perhaps I will leave it there for today and ask you to have a look at it. Perhaps we could have a chat at some point separately. I will separately put in some detailed questions as supplementaries. But as my time is a bit limited, I will move back to some of the other issues. So thank you, Ms. Webb, for that. Could I ask you, just in relation again to the minimum track standards for greyhound racing, I understand that Greyhound Racing New South Wales undertook a statewide safety audit of all the greyhound racing tracks against the New South Wales Greyhound Track minimum standards. And in February of this year, you advised via questions on notice that you expect all the tracks to be compliant by 2023. Are you able to tell me which tracks are not yet compliant?
I don't have those tracks at hand, Chair, but I can certainly get them to you. But what I can say that there are a significant number of tracks that have been slated for upgrade to cater for the capital grants program, the $30 million. And in addition to that, as part of the operating licence of Greyhound Racing New South Wales, there will be an extra $5 million over the next 5 years for infrastructure of grounds around as well. So participants will be able to at least have upgraded modern facilities such as kennels and things like that to look after not only the welfare of animals, but it's important that people also have good facilities. So significant investment in those tracks as well as the infrastructure around the tracks to provide a better experience for participants as well as the welfare and integrity of the greyhounds, Chair.
Thank you. And can you tell me when the results of that audit are to be released publicly?
I'll come back to you on that, Chair.
Thank you. And perhaps if you could give us on notice an update of the progress of all track upgrades that have been funded through the Greyhound Racing Capital Grants program.
Certainly.
If the tracks are not compliant prior to 2023, what are the consequences for those tracks?
Well, it's my expectation, Chair, that they will be. There is sufficient funds in the capital grants program to be able to undertake that. There is that track strategy that has been released by Greyhound Racing New South Wales, and it's my expectation that they will be done in that time frame.
Thank you. Just moving to whips in horse racing, and I know that my colleague Mr Pearson asked about this as well. When we look at something like the Everest event earlier this month, we had 12 jockeys breaching whip usage rules, including half of them which was half of the jockeys that competed in the Everest race, but only one of the 12 jockeys were fined for breaching the rules. I understand that those rules are industry rules rather than regulations of your government, but given that the rules are pretty lax and also that they don't seem to be able to enforce them or don't seem willing to enforce them, do you think it's time that we brought some regulations around whipping within New South Wales legislation?
So in terms of the issue you're talking about there, the codes are very strict in relation to the rules of racing set by Racing New South Wales. They take the welfare of thoroughbreds very seriously. Hence, you've just highlighted the fact that several jockeys were mentioned in relation to what they were doing on the day of Everest, and it's held in very, very high regard, and a very dim view is placed upon those who do the wrong thing. So in terms of Racing New South Wales, they are the ones who set the rules. They set a very high standard and are managing any breach at all.
Okay, so why then is a breach by a jockey not followed up on with any kind of penalty or consequence?
Well, that's a matter for Racing New South Wales, but in terms of the code of conduct and the rules of racing set by Racing New South Wales, I'd ask Mr O'Brien if he would like to elaborate any further.
Thank you.
Sure.
So, I mean, we have information in front of us about the circumstances of those particular jockeys that you mentioned and the nature of the breaches. It's the responsibility of Racing New South Wales stewards to determine the extent of the breach and what penalties apply.
So what is the explanation then for jockeys clearly breaching the whipping rules, not being held accountable for that and facing no consequence? Doesn't that concern you or you, Minister? You're not concerned by that?
So they would have been investigated by Racing New South Wales, who are the authority in relation to setting those codes of conduct and those rules, and they would have determined the appropriate penalty or the appropriate course of action to be taken.
And so would you agree then that the appropriate penalty for whipping a horse in excess of that you're permitted to do is appropriate? So it's okay to have no consequence for that?
Racing New South Wales would have assessed the level of breach and appropriately either put a penalty in place, or they'll either get banned for a couple of races or they'll get a fine or whatever the case may be, Chair. So they would have determined the level of penalty based on that individual circumstance.
Okay, but in 11 of the 12 cases where there was whipping in excess of the rules, as we had video footage for. In 11 of those 12 cases, there were no consequences for the jockeys. What message does that send to jockeys for future races?
Chair, Racing New South Wales takes its role of welfare and particularly enforcing its code of conduct and rules of racing very seriously. They would have assessed each individual incident and determined the course of action. So it's a matter for Racing New South Wales.
You can understand, though, can you not, how confusing it is for someone like me, who is not a racing participant, to understand how you can have a rule that you're not allowed to whip a horse more than a certain amount of times, to then see a horse be whipped over and over and over, well in excess of what's required, what's permitted, and then for that jockey to have, in what possible circumstances would that jockey be able to wriggle out of that as though they didn't do it? We just all saw them do it.
Well, again, each individual circumstance is investigated by Racing New South Wales, and they are the authority in terms of making sure that no codes are breached. If they are, then the penalties will apply.
Okay, so I'm asking you, from your knowledge of this situation, it's a bit strange, isn't it, that they didn't get any consequence for that breach?
I didn't see the individual circumstances that you're talking about, Ms. Boyd, so it's difficult for me to comment on individual circumstances that you are talking about.
Okay, if they in fact breached the code by whipping a horse more than they were permitted to, would you expect them to have a consequence for that?
Well, Racing New South Wales would assess each one on its merit, and ultimately they would afford the appropriate penalty if someone does breach the code, and we've seen that quite significantly.
And if there wasn't, if there was no penalty for a breach of the code,
well, Racing New South Wales are the ones who hand out.
What would you expect to happen, Minister?
Yeah, it's a matter for Racing New South Wales. They do quite high-level work in relation to welfare, integrity and enforcing the code. So
respect is a matter for you, though, because you do have the power to introduce legislation that would actually prohibit a certain, ideally prohibit whipping altogether, but let's say that we were to replicate the rules that currently the industry has in place, you could then enforce that under regulation. So you do have that power. So it is a matter for you to determine whether or not you think that's acceptable.
The current rules of racing and the codes of conduct, I believe, are appropriate as handed down by Racing New South Wales.
And the enforcement?
As handed down by Racing New South Wales. They hand out some pretty hefty fines, Chair.
Unfortunately, we're out of time and I appear to be going nowhere. So I will ask the...
Those straight tracks or oval
It was
again?
a very straight track. So I will ask the government if they have any questions that they want to ask to bring us
Try not to
home.
be argumentative.
Hand over to Wes for such.
Chair, as much as I'd like to, I feel that the Minister has accurately covered all aspects of his portfolio today, and there is no need for us to ask any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Fang. It has indeed been a long day, and I'm sure we're grateful to be allowed out 15 minutes earlier. Thank you very much, Minister, and thank you to all the government officials for coming today. I do understand the time it takes to prepare and attend, and we are very grateful. To the extent there were questions taken on notice, and there will be supplementary questions, the Committee Secretariat will be in touch with you. I'd like to thank the Committee Secretariat for all of their assistance today. It's been very busy, and the committee for being relatively well behaved. Thank you.
Thank you for your time, Chair, and the
Colleagues.
committee. Thank you.
We have a deliberate?